Bhairava, the terrifying face of the divine. The night air hangs heavy over the cremation ground, thick with smoke and the scent of burning sandalwood. Shadows dance across ancient stones as flames consume what was once flesh and bone. This is a place most people avoid, a threshold between worlds where life meets death in its most primal form. But there are those who seek out this darkness, who meditate among the pyres, who see in this place of endings something sacred and transformative. And if you were to venture into such a place on the darkest night of the lunar month, when the veil between worlds grows thin, you might catch a glimpse of something that would freeze your blood and awaken your soul in the same instant. A figure, dark as midnight, adorned with a garland of skulls, eyes blazing with an intensity that seems to pierce through time itself. At his feet, a black dog stands guard, alert and loyal. In his hands, weapons that promise both destruction and protection. This is Bhairava, the terrifying form of Shiva, the deity who guards the boundaries of existence itself. His very name whispers of fear. Bhairava. The word comes from the Sanskrit root biru, meaning fearsome or terrifying. Yet this fear is not the fear of something evil or malevolent. This is the fear that shatters illusions, that destroys the comfortable lies we tell ourselves about who we are and what matters. This is the fear that precedes liberation itself. Tonight, we journey into the heart of one of Hinduism's most complex and misunderstood deities. We will walk the path that Bhairava himself walked, from his violent birth in a moment of divine fury to his role as the eternal guardian of India's most sacred city. We will explore his 8 manifestations that control the directions of the universe, unravel the deeper meanings behind his terrifying appearance, and understand why this fierce deity holds such an important place not only in Hindu tradition, but also in Buddhism and Jainism. We will meet the ancient skull-bearing ascetics who imitated his cremation ground existence, discover why the humble dog serves as his sacred vehicle, and learn how Kashmir Shaivism elevated this fierce deity to the status of supreme reality itself. This is not a story for those seeking comfort. Bhairava does not come to reassure or to soothe. He comes to shatter and transform, to destroy what must die, so that what is eternal can be revealed. He is the master of time, the destroyer of ego, the protector of truth, and the companion of those brave enough to face their own darkness. So take a breath and prepare yourself. We are about to encounter the terrifying grace of Bhairava. The supreme consciousness takes form. Before we can understand Bhairava, we must first understand what he represents in the vast cosmos of Hindu mythology. In the Hindu tradition, reality is not static but dynamic, constantly moving through cycles of creation, preservation, and dissolution. At the heart of this cosmic dance stand 3 primary deities: Brahma, the creator; Vishnu, the preserver; and Shiva, the destroyer. But Shiva is not simply a destroyer in the negative sense. He is the transformer, the one who breaks down what has outlived its purpose so that new life can emerge. He is the eternal yogi meditating on Mount Kailash, the cosmic dancer whose movements set the rhythm of the universe, the ascetic covered in ashes who has renounced all worldly attachments. He is gentle and fierce, benevolent and terrifying, meditative and active. He contains all contradictions within himself. And Bhairava is the aspect of Shiva that embodies his most fearsome, his most uncompromising nature. Where Shiva might be approached with gentleness, Bhairava demands absolute truth. Where Shiva might show patience, Bhairava acts with decisive swiftness. He is the aspect that cannot be bargained with, that will not tolerate ego or pretense, that strips away everything false until only reality remains. In the philosophy of Kashmir Shaivism, which we will explore in depth later, Bhairava is not merely an aspect or manifestation of something greater. He is the supreme reality, the ultimate consciousness from which all existence springs. He is called Parabrahman, the absolute that exists beyond all form and concept. This is a radical understanding that places this fierce deity at the very center of existence itself. But Bhairava is also intimately connected to the human experience. He is the Lord of Time, Kala Bhairava, the one who reminds us that our days are numbered, that death comes for us all, and that in recognizing this truth lies our freedom. He is the destroyer of fear precisely because he embodies everything we fear most: death, loss, the dissolution of the ego, the ending of everything we cling to. The ancient texts describe him with a dark complexion, the color of storm clouds or of the void itself. His eyes are wide and fierce, capable of seeing through all deception. His hair is matted like that of a wandering ascetic, piled high on his head. Around his neck hangs a garland of skulls, each one a reminder of the impermanence of all things. In his multiple hands, he carries an array of weapons and implements: the trident that pierces through illusion, the drum whose rhythm sets the beat of creation and destruction, the skull cup from which he drinks, the noose that binds ignorance. And at his feet stands the dog, black as night, loyal beyond measure, alert to every threat. This humble creature, often considered impure in many Hindu traditions, is elevated to the status of divine vehicle by Bhairava. There is a teaching in this choice, a deliberate inversion of conventional values that characterizes much of Bhairava's approach to spirituality. Bhairava is worshipped across the Indian subcontinent and beyond, from the snow-capped peaks of the Himalayas to the southern tip of Tamil Nadu, from the ancient temples of Nepal to the Buddhist monasteries of Tibet and Mongolia. His influence crosses religious boundaries, appearing in tantric traditions both Hindu and Buddhist. He is revered by conventional devotees seeking protection and by radical ascetics seeking ultimate liberation. He is the guardian of sacred spaces and the destroyer of cosmic order when that order becomes corrupt. To understand Bhairava is to understand something essential about the nature of spiritual transformation. It is to recognize that the path to enlightenment is not always gentle, that sometimes what we need most is not comfort but challenge, not reassurance but confrontation with truth. Bhairava is the deity who meets us at our edge, at the boundary of our comfort, and asks us whether we have the courage to go further. His story begins not in peaceful meditation but in cosmic conflict, not in calm deliberation, but in explosive rage. It begins with an act of violence that would shock the heavens and set in motion a chain of events that would establish Bhairava's eternal role in the cosmic order. And it begins with the very thing that Bhairava is destined to destroy: ego. The birth of terror, when Brahma's pride awakened the destroyer. In the beginning, before the birth of Bhairava, there was a question that needed answering, a conflict that required resolution. It was a question about supremacy, about who among the gods could claim the highest position. And this question arose from the very creator God himself. Brahma, the four-headed deity responsible for bringing forth all creation, began to grow proud. Some texts say he originally had 5 heads, each facing a different direction, so he could see all of creation at once. He looked upon all that he had made and began to believe that he was the supreme power in the universe, greater even than Shiva or Vishnu. The ancient Puranic texts tell us what happened next in several versions, each one slightly different, but all pointing to the same essential truth. In one version, Brahma and Vishnu were engaged in a fierce argument about which of them was superior. Their dispute grew so heated that it threatened to tear apart the fabric of creation itself. All the gods gathered, watching in dismay as these two cosmic powers battled for supremacy. Into this chaos, Shiva manifested as a blazing pillar of light, an infinite column of fire that pierced through all the worlds, extending endlessly upward and downward, beyond the reach of measurement or comprehension. The gods stood in awe before this manifestation of pure, infinite consciousness. Shiva's voice resonated through the cosmos. If either of you can find the end of this pillar, that one shall be acknowledged as supreme. Vishnu, in his humility and wisdom, transformed himself into a boar and dove deep into the earth, seeking the bottom of the infinite pillar. He searched for countless eons, descending through layer upon layer of reality, but found no end. Finally, exhausted and humbled, he returned to the surface and admitted his failure. He acknowledged that Shiva's power was beyond measurement, beyond competition, beyond ego. But Brahma, consumed by his pride, decided to deceive. He transformed himself into a swan and flew upward, searching for the top of the pillar. He too searched for ages, ascending through realm upon realm, but found no end. The pillar extended infinitely upward, beyond all heavens, beyond all conception. Then Brahma encountered the Ketaki flower, floating down from some unimaginable height. In his desperation and pride, Brahma convinced this flower to be his false witness. He returned to the assembled gods and proclaimed that he had found the top of the pillar, that the Ketaki flower had been there and could testify to his achievement. He claimed victory and demanded recognition as the supreme deity. But you cannot deceive Shiva. You cannot lie to the infinite consciousness. You cannot pretend before the one who sees all things as they truly are. Shiva saw through Brahma's deception instantly. And from between his eyebrows, from his third eye which burns away all illusion, from the very center of his forehead, where the power of ultimate truth resides, there emerged a new being. Or perhaps we should say that an existing aspect of Shiva took manifest form for the first time. This being was terrible to behold. His form was massive and overwhelming, filled with the fury of violated truth. His eyes blazed with righteous anger. His hair stood on end like flames. His skin was dark as the void. He carried weapons of destruction. This was Bhairava, born in a moment of divine wrath, manifested to punish arrogance and restore cosmic order. Some texts describe this moment with even more visceral intensity. They say that Shiva, in his fury at Brahma's lie, pulled a single lock of hair from his head and threw it to the ground. As it struck the earth, it transformed and expanded, taking on the terrifying form of Bhairava. This detail carries deep symbolism. Even a tiny piece of Shiva contains enough power to shake the foundations of reality. Shiva's command to Bhairava was direct and uncompromising. Go and punish this arrogance. Remove the head that spoke falsely. Teach this lesson that must be learned. In other versions of the story, the offense is slightly different, but the essence remains. Brahma's fifth head, positioned at the top of his body, began to recite the Vedas with great pride. But as it recited, it also began to criticize Shiva, making insulting comments about his appearance, his choice to live as an ascetic, and his unconventional ways. This fifth head embodied Brahma's inflated ego, his sense that as the creator, he was entitled to judge even Shiva himself. Or in yet another telling, Brahma's fifth head became infatuated with his own daughter, Sarasvati, gazing at her with inappropriate desire. Whenever Sarasvati tried to move away from his lustful gaze, Brahma would sprout another head to continue watching her. This breach of cosmic dharma, this fundamental violation of proper order, required immediate and decisive action. Whatever the specific provocation, the result was the same. Bhairava approached Brahma with inexorable purpose. Despite Brahma's pleas, despite the intervention of other gods, despite the terror that now gripped the creator god, Bhairava performed his appointed task. With the nail of his left thumb, or in some versions with a fierce weapon, Bhairava severed Brahma's fifth head. The symbolism here is profound and multi-layered. The fifth head represents the inflated ego, the part of consciousness that claims to be separate from and superior to the whole. It represents false speech, pride that blinds us to truth, the arrogance that believes it has the right to judge what it cannot comprehend. Its removal is not simple destruction, but a kind of cosmic surgery, cutting away the diseased part so that health can be restored. Brahma's four remaining heads represent the four Vedas, the four directions, the four legitimate functions of consciousness. These were not destroyed, but the fifth, the excess, the part that had grown beyond proper bounds, had to be severed. As Brahma's head fell, his ego was finally shattered. He understood his error. He saw his place in the cosmic order with clarity for the first time. The ancient texts tell us that in this moment of losing his false superiority, Brahma actually gained true wisdom. The destruction of his pride opened the path to genuine enlightenment. Vishnu, witnessing these events, immediately offered prayers of devotion to Shiva. He recognized and acknowledged Shiva's supremacy without reservation. The crisis was resolved. Cosmic order was restored. But the story was far from over. In fact, the most profound part was just beginning. Because in severing Brahma's head, Bhairava had committed the most serious crime imaginable in Hindu Dharma. He had killed a Brahmin, one of the priestly class who are considered sacred and inviolable. Even though Brahma himself was a god, even though the act was carried out on Shiva's direct command, even though it was necessary to restore cosmic balance, the sin of Brahmahadya, the murder of a Brahmin, still attached itself to Bhairava. This is one of the deepest aspects of Bhairava's mythology. He is not some distant, untouchable deity who acts without consequences. Even though he is a manifestation of Shiva himself, even though he acted righteously to punish arrogance and restore truth, he still bears the karmic weight of his action. The law of karma, of action and consequence, applies even to gods when they take manifest form. The moment Brahma's head was severed, it stuck to Bhairava's hand. No matter what he did, he could not remove it. The skull became permanently attached to his palm, a constant reminder of the act he had committed. And there was more. From the ether, from the very concept of sin given form, there manifested a terrible female entity called Brahmahadya. She was the personification of the sin of killing a Brahmin, and she began to pursue Bhairava relentlessly. Brahmahadya was described as a gory, terrifying figure, more frightening even than Bhairava himself. She followed him everywhere, never resting, never ceasing her pursuit. She represented not just divine punishment, but the inevitable consequences of action, the way that even necessary violence leaves its mark on the one who commits it. Shiva, seeing what had occurred, prescribed the path of atonement. He commanded Bhairava to wander the world as a beggar, to visit all the sacred places, to seek forgiveness and purification. The skull attached to his hand would serve as his begging bowl. He would be a kapalika, a skull-bearer, wandering the world in a state of ritual impurity until he could find release. And so began Bhairava's great journey, a pilgrimage that would take him through all three worlds, that would establish some of the most important spiritual practices in Hindu tradition, and that would ultimately lead him to the city where he would find his eternal home and his ultimate purpose. The wandering years, Bhairava's journey through the three worlds. Imagine, for a moment, being Bhairava in those first moments after severing Brahma's head. The fury that had driven you to action has subsided. The cosmic order has been restored. The arrogant god has been humbled. Justice has been served. And yet, attached to your hand is the skull of the one you killed, and behind you, never ceasing, never sleeping, comes the terrible pursuit of your own sin made manifest. This is where Bhairava's journey truly begins. Not in the moment of his creation, not in the act of cosmic justice, but in the aftermath, in the long process of atonement that would transform him from an agent of divine wrath into something even more profound. The ancient texts describe Bhairava wandering through all three worlds, the earthly realm, the heavens, and the underworld. Everywhere he went, he carried the skull in his hand, using it as a begging bowl. The once proud destroyer, born from Shiva's fury, now walked as a mendicant, dependent on the charity of others for his sustenance. This image carries tremendous symbolic weight. The skull that had belonged to Brahma, the creator god, now served as a cup for begging. Creation itself had been humbled, reduced to a vessel for receiving alms. And Bhairava, who had acted with such decisive violence, now moved through the world in a state of ritual impurity, seeking redemption. But this was not a quiet, dignified pilgrimage. The texts tell us that Bhairava was accompanied by his Ganas, his fierce attendants and goblins, a wild horde of semi-divine beings who followed him through the worlds. They sang, they danced, they laughed with wild abandon. Bhairava himself would break into spontaneous movement, dancing with the skull in his hand, covered in ashes, adorned with bones and serpents. This detail is crucial to understanding Bhairava's nature. Even in atonement, even in penance, he did not become somber or grave. He embodied a kind of fierce joy, a radical freedom that comes from having transcended conventional morality. He had committed the ultimate sin according to Hindu law, and yet he moved through the world with an almost manic energy, as if the very act of bearing his sin had liberated him from caring about social judgment. The Brahmahadya followed him everywhere. Some texts describe her as a skeletal woman covered in blood, others as a mass of flames, others as a formless horror that instilled dread in all who saw it. She was relentless, tireless, the embodiment of consequences that cannot be escaped. Bhairava visited countless sacred places in his wanderings. He bathed in holy rivers, hoping to wash away the sin. He worshipped at temples, seeking the blessings of other deities. He performed penances and austerities. But nothing worked. The skull remained attached to his hand, and Brahmahadya continued her pursuit. At one point in his journey, Bhairava came to Vaikuntha, the celestial realm where Vishnu resides. Here, something significant happened. Vishnu and his consort Lakshmi received Bhairava with great honor and devotion. They worshipped him, they fed him, they showed him respect due to a manifestation of Shiva himself. This was despite his state of ritual impurity, despite the sin he carried, despite his fearsome appearance. Vishnu's guard, Vishvaksena, initially tried to bar Bhairava's entrance. Who was this impure wanderer seeking to enter the realm of Vishnu? But Vishnu himself intervened, declaring that Bhairava should be welcomed and honored. This detail teaches something important about the nature of divine vision. Vishnu saw past the surface, past the ritual impurity, to the essential nature of who Bhairava was. He recognized that sometimes the one who appears most impure is actually performing the most sacred function. But even Vishnu's intervention could not remove the skull or stop the Brahmahadya. Bhairava had to continue his journey. He wandered through the Daru forest, a sacred grove associated with ancient sages and ascetics. He visited the abodes of various deities. Everywhere he went, he begged for alms, received food in the skull bowl, and continued his strange, intense pilgrimage. The tradition of the Kapalikas, or skull bearers, which would become an important tantric tradition in later Hinduism, traces its origins to this period of Bhairava's wandering. These were ascetics who deliberately imitated Bhairava's practice, carrying skulls as begging bowls, covering themselves in ashes from cremation grounds, and engaging in practices that violated conventional social norms as a path to transcendent realization. But we will explore the Kapalikas in more depth later. For now, we follow Bhairava on his journey toward the one place where his sin could finally be dissolved, where the skull would at last fall from his hand, where Brahmahadya would lose her power over him. That place was Varanasi, known also as Kashi or Benares, the city of light, the eternal city, the most sacred place in all of Hindu geography. Shiva himself had declared it to be the place of ultimate liberation, where those who die are automatically freed from the cycle of rebirth. It is the city that has stood at the center of Hindu spiritual life for thousands of years, the city that draws millions of pilgrims every year, the city that has witnessed the full spectrum of human spiritual striving. As Bhairava approached Varanasi, something began to change. The Brahmahadya, who had followed him so relentlessly through all three worlds, began to hesitate. Her power weakened. The sacred geography of Kashi itself began to act on her, to dissolve her hold. The moment Bhairava crossed the boundary into Kashi, Brahmahadya let out a terrible scream. She was being destroyed, not by violence, but by the sheer concentrated holiness of the place. She cried out, she wailed, and then she dissolved completely into the air, leaving Bhairava finally free from her pursuit. And the skull, that had been stuck to his hand through countless worlds and ages, simply fell away. It dropped to the ground at a specific spot that would later become known as Kapala Mokin, the liberation of the skull. This place still exists in Varanasi today, a sacred site where the ultimate burden was finally released. Bhairava stood in Kashi, free at last from the sin of Brahmahadya, his long penance completed. The wandering was over. He had walked through the consequences of his action, had borne the weight of even necessary violence, had found his way to purification not through denial or escape, but through full acceptance and atonement. And it was here, in this moment of liberation, that Shiva spoke to him again. The texts record Shiva's words, Kala Bhairava, you who are the Lord of time, you who are beyond even death itself. I give you eternal sovereignty over this city of Kashi. You will be its guardian, its protector, its enforcer of Dharma. All who come here will be under your jurisdiction. You will judge them, protect them, and ensure that this city remains the place of ultimate liberation that I have ordained it to be. And so Bhairava found his permanent home and his eternal purpose. From that day forward, he has been known as the Kotwal of Kashi, the chief of police, the guardian who watches over the city and everyone in it. No one can truly enter Kashi without Bhairava's permission. No one can die in Kashi without passing through his judgment. He stands at the threshold, the gatekeeper of liberation itself. Even today, pilgrims who come to Varanasi traditionally visit the Kala Bhairava temple first, before going to the main Kashi Vishwanath temple dedicated to Shiva. They seek Bhairava's blessing and permission before beginning their spiritual journey in the city. They acknowledge him as the protector, the one who has the authority to grant or deny access to the sacred. This is not just mythology or ancient legend. If you were to walk through the narrow lanes of old Varanasi today, past the ghats where bodies are cremated day and night, past the temples that have stood for centuries, past the places where pilgrims bathe in the Ganges seeking purification, you would find Bhairava's presence everywhere. His image appears on street corners, his temples, the city, and the sound of his mantras mingles with the general din of one of the most intense, alive, sacred cities on earth. But Bhairava's role in Kashi is more than that of a simple guardian. He represents something essential about the nature of this sacred city and about the spiritual path itself. Kashi is not a place of comfort or ease. It is a place of transformation, of death and rebirth, of the dissolution of everything false. And Bhairava, With his fierce aspect, his uncompromising nature, his willingness to destroy what must be destroyed, embodies the spirit of this transformation. In Kashi, Bhairava is both feared and deeply loved. He is the strict father, the stern teacher, the protector who will not tolerate dishonesty or spiritual laziness. He is also the one who removes obstacles, who destroys the inner demons that prevent us from realizing our true nature, who guards us against the external forces that would prevent our liberation. The main Kala Bhairava temple in Varanasi is a place of intense devotional activity. Inside, only the silver face of Bhairava is visible to visitors through the doorway of the inner sanctum. The rest of his image, said to show him sitting on a dog and holding a trident, is hidden behind a cloth. His lieutenants, the temple priests, wield the peacock feather club that Bhairava carries, using it to bless devotees and ward off illness. But Bhairava's presence in Kashi extends beyond this single temple. He manifests in 8 primary forms, the Ashta Bhairava, positioned at the 8 cardinal and intercardinal directions around the city, creating a protective mandala of divine power. And it is to these 8 manifestations that we now turn our attention. The 8 guardians, understanding the Ashta Bhairava. If you were to look at a map of Varanasi, or Kashi as it's known in sacred geography, and mark the locations of the 8 primary Bhairava temples, you would see something remarkable. They form a geometric pattern around the city, positioned at the 8 cardinal and intercardinal directions: north, south, east, west, northeast, northwest, southeast, and southwest. This is not accidental. This is cosmic architecture made manifest, a sacred mandala inscribed on the landscape itself. The Ashta Bhairava, the 8 manifestations of Bhairava, represent one of the most sophisticated theological concepts in Hindu tantric tradition. Each of these forms has its own distinct characteristics, its own energy, its own area of influence, its own methods of blessing and protecting devotees. Together, they create a complete system, a comprehensive expression of Bhairava's power operating at all levels of reality. At the center of this system stands Mahaswarna Kala Bhairava, the supreme golden Kala Bhairava, who is considered the ruler of all the other forms. He is time itself, the great destroyer who eventually consumes all things, the ultimate reality from which the other 7 emerge and to which they return. He presides over the entire cosmic order, ensuring that everything moves according to the great cycles of creation, preservation, and dissolution. But each of the 8 has his own specific function, his own gifts to offer, his own lessons to teach. Understanding them gives us a deeper appreciation for the multifaceted nature of Bhairava's power and purpose. Asatanga Bhairava, whose name means dark-limbed, governs the eastern direction. His color is bright or golden, and he sits upon a swan, the vehicle of Sarasvati, goddess of learning and arts. This association immediately tells us something about his nature. He is the Bhairava who presides over creativity, who helps devotees develop their artistic and intellectual abilities. His consort is Brahmi, the feminine power associated with the creator god Brahma. Devotees worship Asatanga Bhairava when they seek to enhance their creative skills, when they want to succeed in artistic endeavors, when they need inspiration and the courage to express themselves. He holds the trident, the drum, and the sword, but he is not primarily warlike. His weapons serve to cut through creative blocks, to destroy the internal obstacles that prevent authentic expression. The eastern direction is where the sun rises, where light first breaks through darkness, where new beginnings happen. Asatanga Bhairava embodies this energy of fresh starts, of creative potential being realized, of ideas taking form. Ruru Bhairava stands in the south-north direction, and his name comes from a specific type of fierce being or from the sound ruru, associated with power. His color is pure white, like snow on mountain peaks or like the dawn. His vehicle is the bull, the same vehicle that serves Shiva himself in his Nandi form. His consort is Vaishnavi, connecting him to the preserving power of Vishnu. Ruru is also known as Ananda Bhairava, the Bhairava of bliss, or Guru Bhairava, the teaching form. His primary gift is the enhancement of knowledge and learning. He helps devotees expand their understanding, guides them in their studies, and leads them toward wisdom that brings prosperity and success. Students particularly revere this form when they seek academic achievement and the ability to retain and apply what they learn. Interestingly, Ruru Bhairava is described as having a peaceful appearance despite his fierce nature. He is young and serene, adorned with gems and ornaments, representing the beauty of knowledge and the joy that comes from genuine understanding. Chanda Bhairava, whose name literally means fierce or angry, rules the southern direction. His color is golden or red, the color of fire and transformative energy. His vehicle is the peacock, that magnificent bird that consumes poisonous snakes and transforms them into the brilliant colors of its plumage. This symbolism is essential to understanding Chanda's function. His consort is Kamunda, one of the most powerful forms of the Divine Mother, known for destroying demons and protecting the righteous. Chanda Bhairava himself represents the power to transmute lower energies into higher ones, to transform poison into medicine, to take the raw materials of anger, fear, and desire and alchemize them into spiritual fuel. When devotees face fierce competition, when they need extraordinary energy to accomplish difficult tasks, when they must overcome powerful obstacles, they turn to Chanda Bhairava. He gives them the strength to not just endure, but to transform their struggles into opportunities for growth. The South is traditionally associated with Yama, the god of death, and with the ancestors. Chanda Bhairava's presence in this direction reminds us that he has power over death itself, that he can transform even the ultimate end into a gateway to liberation. Krodha Bhairava, the wrathful one, guards the southwest direction. His color is dark blue or smoky, like storm clouds gathering, like the darkness before lightning strikes. His vehicle is Garuda, the eagle that serves as Vishnu's mount, known for its sharp vision and ability to see through all deception. His consort is Kamari, the power associated with the warrior god Kartikeya. Krodha Bhairava represents righteous anger, the fury that arises when dharma is violated, the wrath that protects the innocent and destroys those who would harm them. But this is not uncontrolled rage. It is focused, intelligent, discriminating anger that knows exactly where to strike to restore balance. Devotees worship Krodha when they need courage to confront injustice, when they must stand up to oppressors, when they need the energy to fight for what is right. He gives them not just anger, but wisdom, helping them channel their intensity in productive directions. He is particularly invoked to remove obstacles, to clear away impediments that block progress. The southwest direction is considered inauspicious in Vasta Shastra, associated with demons and negative influences. Krodha Bhairava's presence here transforms this dangerous direction into a source of protective power. Unmata Bhairava, whose name means mad or intoxicated, presides over the western direction. His vehicle is the horse, representing wild, unbounded energy that moves with tremendous speed and power. His consort is Virhi, the fierce boar-headed goddess. His color varies in different traditions, but is often described as dark or mixed. Unmata represents divine madness, the state that lies beyond logic and conventional thought, the wisdom that appears as foolishness to those still trapped in ordinary consciousness. He teaches that there is a level of understanding that can only be reached by abandoning rational control, by entering into states of ecstatic transcendence where the normal boundaries of self dissolve. Devotees worship Unmata when they seek liberation from the constraints of ordinary mind, when they need to break through to new levels of consciousness, when they want to experience the divine intoxication that comes from direct realization of ultimate truth. He helps remove mental obstacles and grants clarity that emerges from going beyond thought itself. The western direction is where the sun sets, where light descends into darkness, where the conscious mind gives way to the unconscious. Unmata Bhairava guards this threshold, helping devotees navigate the journey into the depths of consciousness. Kapila Bhairava, the skull-bearer, watches over the northwest direction. His vehicle is the bird, representing the soul's ability to soar beyond physical limitations. His consort is Maheshvari, the great goddess of power. His color is yellow or golden, the color of wisdom and spiritual illumination. Kapila Bhairava directly embodies Bhairava's role as the one who carried Brahma's skull. He represents the acknowledgement of mortality, the willingness to face death directly, the understanding that all physical forms eventually dissolve. Yet paradoxically, in this acknowledgement of death lies the secret of immortality. When we fully accept that the body-mind complex is temporary, we can discover that which is eternal within us. This form of Bhairava is particularly associated with the tantric tradition that arose from his example, the skull-bearing ascetics who took the name Kapalika. He teaches that spiritual truth often requires us to embrace what society rejects, to find the sacred in what others consider impure or frightening. Devotees worship Kapila for courage in facing their own mortality, for the strength to let go of attachments, and for the wisdom that comes from contemplating death. He helps them understand that the ego self is like the skull, something that must eventually be set aside so that the eternal self can be realized. Bishana Bhairava, the terrifying one, guards the northern direction. His vehicle is the horse, the same as Unmata, but his energy is different. His color is red like blood or like the flames of cremation fires. His consort is Narasimha, the fierce lion-headed power associated with Vishnu's man-lion avatar. Bishana represents the absolute terror that precedes liberation, the fear that must be faced and transcended on the spiritual path. He is called the most fearsome of the Bhairavas, the one whose very appearance can make demons flee. Yet this terror serves a purpose. It shatters all our comfortable illusions, destroys all our false securities, and reveals the emptiness of everything we thought was solid. When devotees worship Bishana, they are asking for the courage to face the ultimate truth, regardless of how frightening it might be. They are requesting the destruction of all comforting lies, all spiritual bypassing, all self-deception. They want reality in its rawest, most uncompromising form. The north is associated with Kabura, the god of wealth, and with spiritual treasures. Bishana Bhairava's presence here reminds us that true spiritual wealth can only be found by those willing to face absolute terror and emerge on the other side. Samhara Bhairava, the destroyer, rules the northeast direction. His vehicle is the elephant, representing massive, irresistible power and royal dignity. His consort is Indrani, the power associated with Indra, king of the gods. His color is dark, like the void from which all emerges and to which all returns. Samhara represents the ultimate dissolution, the final destruction at the end of the cosmic cycle when all forms return to formless potential. But destruction here is not nihilistic. It is the necessary precondition for renewal. Without dissolution, there can be no new creation. Without endings, there can be no beginnings. This form of Bhairava is worshipped by those seeking to destroy negative patterns in their lives, to end toxic relationships, to eliminate self-destructive habits, to bring closure to what has outlived its purpose. He teaches that sometimes the greatest kindness is to allow what needs to die to actually die, rather than artificially prolonging its existence. The northeast is considered the most auspicious direction in Vasta Shastra, associated with the gods themselves. Samhara Bhairava's presence here reveals a profound teaching. Destruction, when it serves the cosmic order, when it clears away what has become corrupt or stagnant, is itself a holy and auspicious function. These 8 forms create a complete system, a full expression of Bhairava's power operating in all directions, at all levels, addressing all needs. Together with Kala Bhairava at the center, they form a 9-fold mandala of protection and transformation around the sacred city of Kashi. The geometric precision of their placement is not just symbolic. In traditional Hindu thought, sacred geography is actual geography. The locations of temples, the arrangement of holy sites, the pathways pilgrims walk, all of these create patterns of energy that have real effects on consciousness. The Ashta Bhairava temples create an energetic boundary around Varanasi, a zone of heightened spiritual power where liberation becomes easier, where the veil between worlds grows thin. Pilgrims traditionally circumambulate the city, visiting each of the 8 Bhairava temples in sequence, receiving the blessings of each form, gradually building up spiritual momentum until they reach a state of readiness for the ultimate realization. This practice, called Ashtanga Bhairava Yatra, is considered one of the most powerful spiritual exercises available in Kashi. But the 8 forms of Bhairava are not limited to Varanasi. They represent universal principles that operate everywhere. Each direction in any space, whether a room or a continent, has its own Bhairava energy, its own particular quality of transformative power. By understanding and working with these energies, practitioners can bring the protective and liberating force of Bhairava into their lives wherever they are. The language of terror, decoding Bhairava's iconography. When you first encounter an image of Bhairava, the immediate response is often visceral. Here is a deity who makes no concession to conventional beauty, who presents himself with deliberate ferocity, who seems designed to provoke shock and even revulsion. His appearance challenges us, confronts us, demands that we look deeper than surface aesthetics to understand what is really being communicated. This is entirely intentional. In Hindu iconography, every detail carries meaning. The appearance of a deity is not arbitrary or decorative. It is a carefully constructed visual language that communicates complex philosophical and spiritual concepts to those who know how to read it. So let us decode Bhairava, element by element, symbol by symbol, understanding what each aspect of his frightening appearance actually means. His body color is typically described as dark, ranging from deep blue to black. This is not the darkness of evil, but the darkness of the void, of infinite space, of pure consciousness that contains all potential. In tantric philosophy, consciousness in its most fundamental state is often represented as darkness or emptiness because it precedes all form, all light, all manifestation. Bhairava's dark color reminds us that he is the supreme reality from which everything emerges and to which everything returns. His eyes are wide, fierce, and blazing. They are often described as red or as shining with inner fire. These are the eyes that see through all deception, that penetrate every disguise, that perceive reality as it actually is without any filtering or softening. In the presence of Bhairava's gaze, nothing can hide. All pretense falls away. The comfortable lies we tell ourselves about who we are and what we're doing become impossible to maintain. The wide-open eyes also represent awakening, the state of complete alertness that characterizes enlightened consciousness. Where ordinary beings move through life half asleep, caught in dreams and delusions, Bhairava is completely awake, completely present, completely aware. His hair is matted and piled high on his head in the style of a wandering ascetic. This Jatamukhita, or crown of matted locks, signifies his connection to Shiva, the great yogi, the one who has renounced all worldly concerns in pursuit of ultimate truth. The matted hair represents the rejection of grooming, of social presentation, of concern with appearance. It says, "I am not here to please you or to fit your expectations. I am beyond such concerns." Within his hair are often depicted the crescent moon and the Ganges River, the same symbols that appear in depictions of Shiva. The moon represents time in its cyclic aspect, waxing and waning, dying and being reborn. The Ganges represents the flow of divine grace, the purifying power that cleanses all sin. These symbols remind us that Bhairava, despite his fearsome independence, is still connected to the larger cosmic order, still part of Shiva's manifestation. Around his neck hangs the mandamala, the garland of skulls. The number varies in different depictions, sometimes 50, representing the letters of the Sanskrit alphabet and thus the creative power of speech, sometimes 108, the sacred number in Hindu tradition. Each skull represents an ego that has been destroyed, a false self that has been seen through and transcended. But there is more. In Tantric philosophy, the skulls also represent the 50 phonemes of Sanskrit, the building blocks of all language, and thus of all conceptual thought. Bhairava wears these around his neck, meaning he has complete mastery over language, over concepts, over the mental constructs through which we ordinarily perceive reality. He is not bound by language, but wears it as an ornament. The mandamala can also represent the souls who have passed through death into his realm, those who have shed their physical bodies and now exist in a different state. Bhairava, as the lord of Kashi and the guardian of the cremation grounds, is intimately familiar with death. The skulls acknowledge this relationship without sentiment or fear. His body is typically described as naked or covered only in a tiger's skin. The nakedness represents absolute honesty, the refusal to conceal or disguise anything. In Indian spiritual tradition, clothes are not just practical items, but signifiers of social role and status. A naked ascetic has rejected all social identity, all pretense, all attempts to be anything other than what they fundamentally are. The tiger skin specifically represents the conquest of lower nature. Tigers symbolize animal passion, predatory instinct, the raw drives that can control human behavior. By wearing the tiger skin, Bhairava shows that he has not suppressed these forces but mastered them, transforming their energy for spiritual purposes. His body is also described as smeared with ash, specifically the ash from cremation grounds. This vibhuti, or sacred ash, carries profound symbolism. Ash is what remains after fire has consumed everything else. It represents the ultimate equality, because no matter what we were in life, rich or poor, powerful or weak, beautiful or plain, we all become the same ash in the end. The ash reminds us of mortality, of impermanence, of the fundamental insubstantiality of everything we take so seriously. But ash also represents purification. The fire that creates it burns away impurities. In covering himself with cremation ash, Bhairava embodies the principle of purification through destruction, of cleaning through burning away what is false. His ornaments include serpents coiled around his arms, neck, and body. Snakes in Hindu iconography represent Kundalini, the serpent power that lies dormant at the base of the spine in most humans. When awakened through spiritual practice, this energy rises through the chakras, bringing enlightenment. Bhairava's serpent ornaments indicate that his Kundalini is fully awakened, that he has achieved complete spiritual power. Snakes also represent time in its deadly aspect, the poison of existence, the danger that lurks in manifestation. Bhairava wears these dangers as ornaments, showing that he has transformed poison into medicine, that he has mastered time rather than being its victim. In his hands, Bhairava typically holds several implements. The number of arms varies in different depictions, sometimes 2, sometimes 4, sometimes 8 or more. Each hand carries an object rich with meaning. The trident or trishula is one of his primary weapons. Its 3 prongs represent many triads: creation, preservation, and destruction, past, present, and future, the 3 gunas or qualities that make up all manifest reality. The trident pierces through illusion, destroying false understanding at multiple levels simultaneously. The damaru or drum produces the primordial sound from which creation emerges. Its beat establishes the rhythm of the cosmos, the pulse of manifestation. Bhairava's possession of the drum indicates his role in the creative process, his participation in the cosmic dance. Yet this is not creation for its own sake, but creation that serves the ultimate purpose of spiritual liberation. The skull bowl or kapala is perhaps his most distinctive implement. This is the skull of Brahma that stuck to his hand, now transformed into a vessel for collecting alms. But it is also described as filled with blood or with amrita, the nectar of immortality. This paradox captures something essential about Bhairava's teaching. That which appears most repulsive, most associated with death, can become the container for the elixir of eternal life. The sword or khadga represents discrimination, the sharp intelligence that can cut through confusion and see what is true. This is not the sword of violence, but the sword of wisdom, the weapon that severs attachment, cuts the bonds of ignorance, and liberates the practitioner from mental bondage. The noose or pasha represents his power to bind and restrain. But what does Bhairava bind? Not the righteous, but the forces of ignorance, ego, and delusion. He catches and restrains the demons of the mind, the negative patterns that would lead us away from realization. Some depictions show him holding a flaming torch or lamp. This represents knowledge, the light of consciousness that illuminates the darkness of ignorance. In his role as guru, as teacher, Bhairava brings the light that allows us to see reality clearly. At his feet, we find the dog, his most distinctive vehicle or vahana. But this deserves its own extended exploration, which we will undertake in the next section. His face is often shown with a third eye in the center of his forehead, the eye of wisdom that sees beyond physical reality into the essential nature of things. This is the eye from which Bhairava himself emerged when Shiva manifested him. It represents direct perception, the ability to know truth immediately without the mediation of logic or sensory data. His expression is fierce, but not cruel. This is an important distinction. Bhairava's terrifying appearance is not meant to indicate that he is malevolent or evil. Rather, it represents the intensity of truth, the uncompromising nature of reality, the seriousness of the spiritual path. His fierce expression says, "I will not coddle you. I will not let you hide from what you need to see. I love you enough to show you the truth, even when the truth is frightening." In some depictions, especially in tantric art, Bhairava is shown in union with his consort, typically Bhairavi. These images represent the union of consciousness and energy, of awareness and power, of the masculine and feminine principles that together constitute complete reality. They are not meant to be sexual in the ordinary sense, but to illustrate the cosmic coupling that generates and sustains all existence. The background of Bhairava images often shows cremation grounds, with funeral pyres burning, corpses in various states of decay, scavenging animals, and fierce spirits. This is his natural habitat, the place where the illusion of permanence cannot be maintained, where the truth of impermanence is absolutely evident. By dwelling in the cremation ground, Bhairava makes himself available to those who are ready to face the ultimate facts of existence. When we understand all these elements together, we see that Bhairava's appearance is actually a form of teaching, a visual sermon on the nature of reality and the path to liberation. Every frightening aspect serves a specific pedagogical purpose. The terror he inspires is not meant to drive us away, but to wake us up, to shock us out of our comfortable delusions, to prepare us for the radical transformation that spiritual realization requires. This is why, paradoxically, devotees who truly understand Bhairava do not find him frightening at all. They see past the fierce form to the loving consciousness that wields terror as a tool of liberation. They recognize that his appearance, however shocking, is actually a manifestation of grace. The grace that refuses to leave us trapped in illusion. The grace that insists we face truth. The grace that loves us enough to show us what we need to see even when we would prefer to look away. The companion at his feet, understanding Bhairava's dog. In the vast pantheon of Hindu deities, where gods ride on magnificent vehicles, Vishnu on the cosmic eagle Garuda, Shiva on the bull Nandi, Durga on a lion, Kartikeya on a peacock, Bhairava's choice of vehicle stands out as deliberately provocative. He rides a dog. In traditional Hindu society, dogs occupy an ambiguous and often lowly position. They are considered impure in many contexts, associated with the streets, with scavenging, with the untouchable classes. They are not allowed in temples. Brahmins will not touch them. Their very presence can compromise ritual purity. And yet Bhairava, this terrifying manifestation of Shiva himself, chooses the dog as his sacred companion and vehicle. This is not accidental. This is profound spiritual teaching encoded in the choice of Vahana. The dog at Bhairava's feet is usually described as black, the color of the void, of night, of the unknown. In some depictions, the dog stands alert and watchful. In others, it sits or lies peacefully at Bhairava's feet. Sometimes Bhairava is shown riding on the dog's back, sometimes simply accompanied by it. But the dog is almost always present in traditional iconography. What does this mean? On the most surface level, the dog represents Bhairava's rejection of conventional purity codes and social hierarchies. In choosing as his vehicle the very animal that high-caste Hindus would avoid, Bhairava makes a statement about the artificial nature of purity and impurity. He declares that spiritual truth has nothing to do with social status or ritual cleanliness. He suggests that what society considers pure might actually be filled with ego and pretense, while what society considers impure might contain hidden spiritual wealth. This teaching would have been especially important in the context of the rigid caste system of ancient India. Bhairava, through his association with dogs, signals his availability to all people regardless of their social position. The lowest outcast, if they approach Bhairava with sincerity, will receive his blessing as readily as the highest Brahmin. Perhaps more readily, since they have less ego to dissolve. But the symbolism goes deeper. Dogs have specific qualities that make them appropriate vehicles for Bhairava. They are intensely loyal. Once a dog bonds with someone, that loyalty is absolute, unwavering, lasting until death. This loyalty represents the kind of devotion that Bhairava both exemplifies toward Shiva and expects from his devotees. It is devotion without questioning, without calculation, without reserve. Dogs are also fearless protectors. They will defend their territory and their loved ones against threats much larger than themselves. This courage, this willingness to face danger in service of those under their protection, mirrors Bhairava's own role as the guardian of Kashi and the protector of devotees. Dogs have an uncanny ability to sense things that humans cannot perceive. They can detect scents, sounds, and energies invisible to human senses. They often appear to see ghosts or spirits that are invisible to us. This heightened sensitivity to subtle realities makes them appropriate companions for Bhairava, who exists at the threshold between worlds, who has authority over spirits and subtle beings, who perceives realities hidden from ordinary view. In tantric philosophy, the dog is specifically associated with the throat chakra, the center of communication and expression. Bhairava's dog therefore represents his power over speech, his mastery of mantra, his ability to communicate truth in ways that penetrate directly to the core of being. There is also a darker association. Dogs are scavengers who eat carrion, who do not distinguish between pure and impure food, who have no qualms about consuming what others would reject. In this, they resemble the Kapalikas and other tantric ascetics who deliberately violated purity taboos as part of their spiritual practice. The dog's eating habits become a metaphor for the practitioner's willingness to incorporate and transform all experiences, including those that conventional morality would reject. In the cremation ground, where Bhairava dwells, dogs are common sights. They scavenge among the remains. They howl at the moon. They move through the smoke and shadows with perfect comfort. They are at home in the place of death, untroubled by what terrifies humans. This ease in the cremation ground makes them natural allies of Bhairava, who has made this place his teaching ground. The relationship between Bhairava and his dog has led to a specific devotional practice that continues to this day. Feeding dogs is considered an act of worship to Bhairava. Devotees will prepare food and offer it to street dogs, particularly black dogs, seeing in this act a way to honor Bhairava himself. On specific days associated with Bhairava worship, especially during the festival of Bhairava Ashtami, you will see large numbers of people bringing food to offer to dogs. In Varanasi, near the Kala Bhairava temple, street dogs are fed and cared for as sacred beings. This practice transforms a simple act of kindness to animals into a form of divine worship. There is a teaching here about seeing the sacred in unexpected places. If Bhairava can be worshipped through a street dog, then divinity must be accessible everywhere, in all beings, regardless of how society has categorized them as high or low, pure or impure. The dog becomes a living reminder that consciousness is not limited to conventionally sacred forms. Some stories elaborate on the dog's significance in even more specific ways. One legend tells that when Bhairava was wandering as a Kapalika, seeking atonement for killing Brahma, a dog followed him everywhere. This dog was actually a form of Yama, the god of death, who had been commanded by Shiva to accompany Bhairava on his journey. The dog's presence ensured that Bhairava would complete his penance, that he would not be deterred or distracted from his path. When Bhairava finally reached Kashi and was freed from his sin, the dog remained with him, now transformed from a guard into a companion, from an enforcer into a friend. This transformation represents the shift from discipline to devotion, from external compulsion to internal love. Another interpretation draws on the Vedic concept of Sarama, the divine dog who serves the gods and is specifically associated with finding what is lost. In the Rig Veda, Sarama tracks down stolen cattle, following their trail where others could not. As Bhairava's vehicle, the dog retains this quality of being able to find what is hidden, to track what has been stolen, including the spiritual treasures that have been stolen by ego and ignorance. In Kashmir Shaivism, which we will explore more fully later, the dog takes on even more philosophical significance. In this tradition, Bhairava represents the supreme consciousness, the absolute reality beyond all forms. The dog, always at his feet, represents the mind or the individual consciousness. The relationship between them teaches that the individual mind is not separate from supreme consciousness, but is its faithful servant, always at its feet. always ready to carry out its will. The dog also represents the power of discrimination, the ability to distinguish between what is real and what is illusory, between what leads toward liberation and what leads toward bondage. Just as a dog can distinguish friend from threat by scent and behavior, the enlightened mind can discriminate truth from falsehood unerringly. There is a poignant quality to the image of Bhairava with his dog. This fierce deity, this terrifying manifestation of divine power, this destroyer of egos and shatterer of illusions, is accompanied by a loyal dog who loves him without understanding all his mysteries, who stays at his feet without needing to comprehend his cosmic significance. It humanizes Bhairava in a strange way, showing that even in his terrifying aspect, he is not alone, not isolated, but accompanied by this simple creature whose loyalty is complete. For devotees, the dog offers a model of how to approach Bhairava, not with complex theology or philosophical understanding, though these have their place, but with simple, direct, unquestioning devotion. The dog does not analyze or theorize. It simply loves and serves. In a tradition that can become overwhelmingly complex, with layers upon layers of symbolism and meaning, the dog represents the possibility of a direct, simple relationship with the divine. Contemporary animal rights activists and animal lovers have sometimes found in the Bhairava tradition a rare instance of Hindu religion elevating dogs to sacred status. While Hindu tradition is generally compassionate toward all life, dogs have traditionally occupied a lower position than cows, monkeys, elephants, and other animals more directly associated with specific deities. Bhairava's choice of the dog as his vehicle creates theological justification for treating dogs with respect and care. In modern India, you will sometimes see stray dogs wearing a tilaka, the mark on the forehead that indicates something sacred, painted on their heads by devotees of Bhairava. These marked dogs are then protected by the community, fed and cared for, seen as representatives of Bhairava himself wandering the streets. The dog at Bhairava's feet thus becomes a bridge between the transcendent and the immanent, between the cosmic deity and the street animal, between elaborate theology and simple devotion. It reminds us that the path to the divine does not always require ascending to rarefied heights, but sometimes involves descending to the level of simple creatures and discovering the sacred there, in the place where conventional religion insists it cannot be. The supreme reality, Bhairava in Kashmir Shaivism. If we were to survey the many traditions within Hinduism that venerate Bhairava, we would find a remarkable range of approaches and understandings. But among all these, Kashmir Shaivism stands out for the radical elevation it gives to this fierce deity. In this philosophical tradition that emerged in the Kashmir Valley between the 8th and 12th century CE, Bhairava is not merely an aspect or manifestation of something greater. He is the ultimate reality itself, the highest conception of the divine that the human mind can approach. Kashmir Shaivism developed a sophisticated non-dualistic philosophy that rivals and in some ways surpasses the better-known Advaita Vedanta tradition. Where Advaita speaks of Brahman as the ultimate reality, Kashmir Shaivism speaks of Bhairava. Where Advaita tends toward abstraction, describing the absolute as without qualities or attributes, Kashmir Shaivism describes a dynamic, conscious, blissful absolute that is actively engaged in the process of manifestation. At the heart of this tradition stands a text called the Vijnana Bhairava, the knowledge of Bhairava. This relatively short scripture presents itself as a dialogue between Bhairava and his consort Bhairavi, though in truth it is a monologue by Bhairava in response to Bhairavi's questions about the nature of reality and the path to liberation. The text begins with Bhairavi asking about the nature of Bhairava himself. Who is this Bhairava that is spoken of as the supreme reality? Is he identical with the energy known as Shakti? Does he take the form of sound? What is his essential nature? Bhairava's answer is profound and provocative. He first describes what he is not. He is not any particular form or manifestation. He is not contained in any specific practice or technique. He is not limited to any tradition or teaching. Having cleared away these misconceptions, he then reveals what he is. The supreme consciousness that witnesses all experiences without being affected by them. The awareness that is present in every moment of perception. The infinite background against which all finite experiences arise. But this is not an abstract, dead consciousness. This is living, vibrant, dynamic awareness that delights in its own existence and pours itself forth in the play of manifestation. The entire universe, in this understanding, is nothing but Bhairava's self-expression, his creative play, his joyful exploration of his own infinite potential. The Vijnana Bhairava then presents 112 meditation techniques, each one a different doorway into recognizing our identity with Bhairava. These practices range from intense concentration to gentle awareness, from complex visualizations to simple attention to ordinary experience. The teaching is that any experience, properly approached, can become a gateway to recognizing the Bhairava consciousness that is our true nature. Some of these practices work with the breath. One technique instructs us to pay attention to the gap between the incoming and outgoing breath, the still point at the top and bottom of the breath cycle. In these momentary gaps, ordinary mind activity ceases, and we can glimpse the underlying consciousness that is always present whether we are breathing in or out. This consciousness is Bhairava. Other practices work with intense emotion. One technique says that when you experience intense pleasure or intense pain, when desire or anger arises with great force, in that very moment of intensity, turn your attention away from the object of emotion and toward the experiencing consciousness itself. That consciousness, which remains stable even while emotions surge through it, is Bhairava. Still, other practices work with everyday activities. There is a technique that instructs us to be fully present in the moment of falling asleep, to maintain awareness as consciousness shifts from the waking state to the dream state. That continuity of awareness, which persists through changing states, is Bhairava. The genius of this approach is that it makes spiritual realization accessible in any moment, through any experience. You do not need to wait for special circumstances or achieve particular states. Bhairava is always present, always accessible, always available to be recognized. The entire spiritual path becomes a matter of learning to recognize what is already the case rather than achieving something new. In Kashmir Shaivism's cosmology, Bhairava is both transcendent and immanent, both beyond the world and fully present within it. The philosophy describes 36 tattvas, or principles of reality, ranging from the most gross and material to the most subtle and spiritual. At the summit of this hierarchy, transcending and including all the lower levels, stands Bhairava as the Parabrahman, the supreme reality. But Bhairava is not content to remain in transcendent isolation. The philosophy teaches that it is Bhairava's nature to manifest, to pour himself forth into creation. This is not due to any lack or need on his part. He is already complete and perfect. Rather, manifestation is his play, his lila, the spontaneous overflow of his infinite creativity and joy. This understanding of Bhairava transforms the entire spiritual project. If Bhairava is the ultimate reality, and if we in our essential nature are Bhairava, then liberation is not a matter of becoming something we are not, but of recognizing what we already are. The entire path becomes a process of removing the misconceptions that hide our true nature rather than of acquiring qualities we lack. The Kashmir Shaivite teachers use the name Bhairava with deliberate intent. They could have used more neutral terms: consciousness, awareness, the absolute, but they specifically chose this fierce, terrifying deity as their name for ultimate reality. This choice carries a message. It reminds us that awakening to our true nature is not a comfortable process. It requires the death of ego, the dissolution of all our cherished identities, the ending of every story we tell ourselves about who we are. This is terrifying. It should be terrifying. Bhairava's fierce form accurately represents what it feels like to have all illusions stripped away. But the tradition also teaches that this terror is the doorway to the greatest bliss. On the other side of ego death lies the recognition of our infinite nature. When we stop being the limited, separate self, we discover that we are the boundless consciousness in which all selves appear. This is Bhairava consciousness. The tradition further teaches that Bhairava consciousness is not merely static awareness, but also dynamic energy. Not just Shiva, but also Shakti. The relationship between Bhairava and Bhairavi, between the masculine and feminine aspects of divinity, represents this unity of consciousness and energy, awareness and power, being and becoming. In elaborate tantric practices, Kashmir Shaivism developed sophisticated techniques for awakening to Bhairava consciousness. These included intense meditation practices, complex visualizations of divine forms, mantra recitation designed to break through ordinary consciousness, and yes, sometimes even transgressive practices that deliberately violated social norms in order to shatter conventional mental frameworks. But the tradition also insisted that simple practices could be equally effective. The Vijnana Bhairava's 112 techniques include methods accessible to anyone, requiring no special initiation or training, available in the midst of ordinary daily life. The message is that Bhairava consciousness is not reserved for advanced yogis or tantric adepts, but is the birthright of every conscious being. One of the most influential Kashmir Shaivite masters was Abhinavagupta, who lived in the late 10th and early 11th centuries. His vast writings synthesized different streams of Shaivite thought into a comprehensive philosophical and practical system. For Abhinavagupta, Bhairava was not a sectarian deity to be worshipped in opposition to other gods, but the ultimate nature of all deities, indeed of all existence. Abhinavagupta taught that every experience we have, from the most mundane to the most profound, is actually a form of Bhairava's self-expression. When we taste food, Bhairava is tasting through us. When we see beauty, Bhairava is appreciated through us. When we think thoughts, Bhairava is thinking through us. Nothing exists outside of or separate from this supreme consciousness. This teaching has radical implications. It means that the spiritual path is not about escaping from ordinary life into some otherworldly realm, but about recognizing the sacred dimension of ordinary life itself. The kitchen becomes a temple, the marketplace becomes a holy site, and every moment becomes an opportunity for recognition of the divine. In Kashmir Shaivism's understanding, Bhairava manifests through what is called spanda, often translated as vibration or pulsation. This spanda is the dynamic throb of consciousness, the living pulse at the heart of existence. It is what makes consciousness alive rather than dead, active rather than passive. Through spanda, Bhairava continuously creates and dissolves the entire cosmos, not in some long-ago act of creation, but right now, in this very moment, with each throb of the cosmic pulse. Human consciousness, in this view, is a localized manifestation of Bhairava consciousness. Our awareness is not separate from or opposed to divine awareness, but is its expression, though typically a limited and contracted expression. Through spiritual practice, we can expand this contracted awareness back toward its full, universal scope, recognizing ourselves as Bhairava. The tradition describes various levels of spiritual achievement, various degrees of recognizing our Bhairava nature. But even the beginning practitioner, even someone who has just heard this teaching for the first time, can have flashes of recognition, moments when the veil lifts and the underlying unity becomes apparent. These moments might occur during meditation, but they might also occur during ordinary activities. You might be walking down the street and suddenly experience a sense of spacious awareness that includes, but is not limited to, your personal perspective. You might be in conversation and notice the consciousness that witnesses the conversation from a place of stillness. You might be falling asleep and catch a glimpse of the awareness that continues when the waking ego shuts down. These are all tastes of Bhairava consciousness. The Kashmir Shaivite tradition emphasizes that recognizing Bhairava consciousness is not a matter of mystical visions or extraordinary experiences, though these can occur. Rather, it is a shift in perspective, a change in how we understand what we are. It is like a wave recognizing that it is actually the ocean, that its wave nature is a temporary expression of something much vaster and more fundamental. This recognition brings what the tradition calls svatantria, or absolute freedom. Not freedom to do whatever we want in the ordinary sense, but freedom from the fundamental bondage of identifying with the limited ego self. When we recognize ourselves as Bhairava, as the infinite consciousness in which all experiences arise, then no experience can truly bind us. We can move through pleasure and pain, success and failure, praise and blame, with equanimity, because we know ourselves to be the witnessing awareness rather than the passing experiences. The tradition also speaks of anugraha, grace, as an essential element in this recognition. While practice and effort have their place, ultimately the recognition of our Bhairava nature comes as a gift, as a spontaneous dawning that cannot be forced or manufactured. Bhairava himself, as our true nature, reveals himself to himself through us. This is sometimes described as Bhairava's descent or Shaktipat, the descent of divine power that awakens us to our true nature. In Kashmir Shaivism's most advanced practices, the practitioner learns to rest in Bhairava consciousness more and more consistently, until it becomes their default state rather than an occasional glimpse. This does not mean they become passive or withdraw from life. Rather, they engage with life more fully because they are no longer burdened by the constant need to protect and defend the ego self. Actions arise spontaneously from the clarity of Bhairava consciousness rather than from the confusion of ego-driven desire. The philosophical profundity of Kashmir Shaivism's approach to Bhairava cannot be overstated. Here is a tradition that takes this fierce, skull-wearing deity and reveals him to be the ultimate nature of reality itself, the consciousness in which and from which all existence arises. It transforms Bhairava from a frightening figure to be propitiated into the very essence of what we are. Yet this transformation does not eliminate Bhairava's fierce aspect. Even when recognized as supreme consciousness, Bhairava retains his terrible nature, because consciousness, when fully awakened, is fierce. It is uncompromising. It cannot tolerate illusion or self-deception. It burns through all falseness like fire-consuming straw. The awakened Bhairava consciousness destroys every comfortable lie, every soothing evasion, every attempt to maintain the status quo of limited identity. This is why Kashmir Shaivism retained all the traditional fierce imagery of Bhairava even while elevating him to supreme status. The skulls, the cremation grounds, the terrifying appearance, all of these remain relevant because they symbolize the death of ego that is necessary for the birth of authentic understanding. They remind us that awakening is not gentle or easy, that it requires a willingness to let everything we think we are die, so that what we actually are can be revealed. The tradition produced elaborate ritual systems for worshipping Bhairava, though with the understanding that all worship is ultimately Bhairava worshipping himself. When we offer flowers to an image of Bhairava, it is Bhairava offering to Bhairava. When we recite mantras invoking his presence, it is Bhairava calling to Bhairava. The entire spiritual life becomes a form of divine play in which consciousness explores and celebrates itself. Kashmir Shaivism's influence spread beyond the Kashmir Valley, though the tradition declined in its homeland after the Islamic conquest of Kashmir in the 14th century. Its insights were preserved and transmitted by lineages of teachers, eventually finding expression in modern times through masters like Swami Lakshmanju, who taught in Kashmir through the 20th century until his death in 1991. Today, Kashmir Shaivism's understanding of Bhairava as supreme consciousness has gained interest among spiritual seekers worldwide. Its non-dualistic philosophy resonates with people drawn to the idea that awakening is a matter of recognition rather than achievement, that our true nature is already perfect and complete, that what we seek is what we already are. The tradition offers a unique synthesis: the devotional fervor of Bhakti Yoga, the philosophical rigor of Jnana Yoga, the practical techniques of Tantric practice, all unified by the recognition that Bhairava consciousness is both the path and the goal, both the seeker and the sought, both the question and the answer. In Kashmir Shaivism, Bhairava is no longer merely the terrifying guardian of cremation grounds or even the protector of Kashi. He becomes the very ground of being itself, the consciousness that is reading these words and the consciousness that wrote them, the awareness in which all experiences arise and dissolve like waves in an infinite ocean. The skull-bearers, Bhairava's radical imitators. If Bhairava's journey of atonement, wandering with Brahma's skull as his begging bowl, was a divine drama played out on the cosmic stage, it did not remain in the realm of myth. Throughout Indian history, there have been human beings who deliberately chose to imitate this aspect of Bhairava's story, creating one of the most controversial and misunderstood movements in Hindu spiritual tradition. These were the Kapalikas, the skull-bearers, ascetics who carried human skulls as begging bowls and engaged in practices that horrified mainstream Hindu society. They smeared their bodies with ash from cremation grounds. They lived among the dead. They performed rituals that inverted conventional notions of purity. They made themselves deliberately repulsive to ordinary people, seeing in this rejection an opportunity for spiritual transformation. The Kapalikas traced their lineage and their practices directly to Bhairava. Just as Bhairava had wandered with the skull attached to his hand, atoning for the sin of Brahmahadya, so too would they wander with skulls, deliberately taking on a similar burden as a path to liberation. They saw Bhairava not merely as an external deity to be worshipped, but as a model to be emulated, a template for spiritual transformation through radical methods. The historical evidence for the Kapalikas comes from several sources. They are mentioned in Buddhist texts, often with disapproval. They appear in Puranic literature, where their practices are described with a mixture of fascination and horror. They are referenced in inscriptions and in the accounts of travelers. And they appear in Sanskrit drama, where they are sometimes portrayed as villains, but more often as mysterious figures whose true spiritual attainment belies their terrifying appearance. One of the most vivid descriptions comes from a 7th century Sanskrit play called Maladi Madhava by the playwright Bhavbhuti. In this drama, a Kapalika ascetic named Agaraganta attempts to sacrifice the heroine to goddess Kamunda in a cremation ground at midnight. The play provides a detailed description of his appearance: matted hair, garland of skulls, body smeared with ash and blood, ornaments made of human bone, carrying a skull bowl and a tantric staff crowned with a skull. While this is obviously a dramatized and perhaps exaggerated portrayal, it gives us insight into how Kapalikas were perceived by their contemporaries. They were associated with cremation grounds, with goddesses like Kamunda and Kali, with nighttime rituals, and with practices involving human remains. They were figures of fear and fascination, operating at the absolute edge of what Hindu society could accommodate. But what were they actually trying to accomplish? Why would someone choose such a path? The Kapalika tradition represented a form of what scholars call transgressive sadhana, spiritual practice that deliberately violates social and religious norms. The underlying philosophy was that conventional morality and purity codes, while necessary for maintaining social order, can become obstacles on the path to ultimate realization. By clinging to concepts of pure and impure, sacred and profane, acceptable and unacceptable, we limit our spiritual understanding. We remain trapped in dualistic thinking that prevents us from experiencing the non-dual reality that transcends all categories. The Kapalikas sought to break through these limitations by engaging in practices that society deemed impure or forbidden. By doing so, they aimed to transcend the mental categories themselves, to reach a state of consciousness where nothing is inherently pure or impure, where all phenomena are recognized as equally manifestations of the divine. This included dwelling in cremation grounds, which in traditional Hindu society were considered profoundly inauspicious places to be avoided except when absolutely necessary. The Kapalikas made these places their home, meditating among the pyres, sleeping near the corpses, becoming intimate with death in its most physical form. This practice was meant to confront and overcome the fear of death, to recognize the impermanence of all physical forms, to break the attachment to the body that keeps most people trapped in identification with the material. It included consuming substances that were strictly forbidden in Orthodox Hinduism: alcohol, meat, and sometimes even more transgressive substances. These were not consumed for pleasure or indulgence, but as part of ritual practice designed to break mental conditioning. By deliberately doing what their culture had taught them was prohibited, they sought to free themselves from the unconscious programming that controlled their behavior and limited their consciousness. It included sexual practices that violated conventional morality. Tantric sexual rituals, when performed with spiritual intent, were understood not as mere indulgence, but as techniques for awakening Kundalini energy and achieving union with the divine. The Kapalikas sometimes engaged in these practices as part of their sadhana, though it is impossible now to separate historical reality from lurid exaggeration by horrified observers. And yes, it included carrying human skulls as begging bowls, directly imitating Bhairava's own atonement. Where did these skulls come from? Some were apparently collected from cremation grounds, the remnants of bodies that had been burned. Others may have come from corpses that had not been properly cremated. The sources disagree, and it is likely that different Kapalika practitioners followed different customs. The skulls served multiple purposes. Practically, it functioned as a begging bowl, used to collect food from householders. Symbolically, it represented the death of ego, the constant reminder that the body-mind complex is temporary. Ritually, it connected the practitioner to Bhairava, making them a conscious imitator of his path. And socially, it marked them as having stepped outside of normal society, having chosen a path that most people could neither understand nor accept. The Kapalikas also had distinct practices regarding mantra and meditation. They were particularly devoted to fierce forms of the divine: Bhairava himself, his consort Kamunda or Bhairavi, and related deities like Kali and Rudra. Their mantras tended toward the powerful and aggressive rather than the gentle and peaceful. Their meditation often involved visualization of fierce deities, contemplation of death and impermanence, and practices designed to awaken powerful energies rather than produce calm states. Historically, the Kapalikas represented a significant movement within medieval Hinduism, particularly from around the 6th to the 13th century CE. They had established institutions, lineages of teachers, and recognized schools of practice. Kings sometimes patronized them despite their transgressive practices, recognizing them as powerful ascetics whose spiritual attainment was genuine even if their methods were unconventional. But the Kapalikas also attracted severe criticism. Orthodox Brahmins denounced them as violators of Dharma. Buddhist and Jain sources condemned their practices as barbaric. Even within Shaivism, more conventional practitioners questioned whether such extreme methods were necessary or beneficial. The debate centered on a fundamental question: does the end of spiritual liberation justify means that violate social and moral norms? The Kapalikas themselves would have answered yes, but with important qualifications. They did not advocate their path for everyone. They recognized that transgressive practices, if undertaken without proper preparation, understanding, and guidance from a qualified teacher, could lead to spiritual disaster rather than liberation. The practices were meant for advanced practitioners who had already internalized Dharma so completely that they could safely transcend it. There is an important distinction here. The Kapalikas were not antinomian in the sense of believing that moral rules don't matter at all. Rather, they believed that for certain practitioners at certain stages of development, temporarily transgressing those rules under controlled conditions could facilitate a breakthrough to a higher level of consciousness where one is no longer bound by rules because one acts spontaneously from wisdom rather than from conditioning. An analogy might help clarify this. A person learning to drive needs to follow traffic rules consciously and carefully. An experienced driver has internalized those rules so completely that they follow them automatically without having to think about each one. A race car driver on a closed track transcends those rules in the sense that they are driving in ways that would be illegal on public roads. But this transcendence is possible only because they have such complete mastery of vehicle control. The Kapalikas saw themselves as spiritual race car drivers, not as reckless teenagers who ignore traffic laws out of stupidity or rebelliousness. The tradition gradually declined after the 13th century, particularly as Muslim rule expanded in India and as Hindu society became more conservative in response to external pressures. The practices were driven underground or abandoned. The lineages were broken or transformed into less transgressive forms. But elements of the Kapalika tradition survived in other movements. The Aghori sect, which continues to exist in small numbers today, preserves some of the cremation ground practices and transgressive elements of the Kapalika path. Various tantric lineages maintain modified forms of some practices, adapted for changed social contexts. And the philosophical insights that motivated the Kapalika approach continue to influence spiritual seekers who understand that sometimes genuine transformation requires going beyond conventional boundaries. It is crucial to note that the historical Kapalikas should not be romanticized. Like any spiritual movement, they probably included both genuine masters of great attainment and charlatans who used the tradition's transgressive reputation as cover for mere indulgence or even criminal activity. The sources suggest that there was significant variation in how different Kapalika practitioners understood and enacted their path. What remains clear is that the Kapalika tradition represented a serious attempt to live out the implications of Bhairava's mythology. If Bhairava himself, a manifestation of Shiva, could wander with a skull as his begging bowl, could dwell in cremation grounds, could violate purity codes in his divine play, then perhaps human practitioners could find liberation by deliberately imitating this divine model. The tradition also reveals something important about Bhairava worship more generally. Bhairava is not a deity who demands conventional piety or respectable behavior. He does not require that his devotees maintain the appearance of social propriety. He is accessible to those on the margins, those who have failed by conventional standards, those who have been rejected by mainstream society. His very existence creates space in Hinduism for paths that would otherwise find no place. Today, when we encounter images of Bhairava or visit his temples, we can recognize that his iconography, the skull, the cremation ground, the transgressive elements, is not merely symbolic decoration. It represents an actual historical tradition of practitioners who took these symbols as literal instructions for how to live and practice. The Kapalikas may be largely gone, but their legacy reminds us that Bhairava's path has always been fierce, uncompromising, and willing to go beyond all conventional limits in pursuit of the ultimate truth. Beyond Hinduism, Bhairava's journey into Buddhism. When Buddhism emerged in India in the 6th century BCE as a reform movement questioning Hindu ritualism and caste hierarchy, it might have seemed unlikely that deities from the Hindu pantheon would eventually find their way into Buddhist practice. Yet by the 7th century CE, as Buddhism evolved into its tantric Vajrayana form, something remarkable happened. Bhairava, in various transformations, became a significant presence in Buddhist tantric tradition, particularly in the regions of Tibet, Nepal, and Mongolia, where Vajrayana flourished. This cross-religious transmission reveals something important about both traditions. It shows Buddhism's pragmatic willingness to adopt and adapt useful techniques and concepts regardless of their source. And it demonstrates that Bhairava's appeal transcends sectarian boundaries, that something about this fierce deity resonates with deep human spiritual needs. The primary Buddhist form of Bhairava is Vajrabhairava, literally Vajra Bhairava, or Diamond Bhairava. In Tibetan Buddhism, he is known as Yamantaka, meaning destroyer of Yama, the death god. This deity occupies a central place in the practices of several Tibetan Buddhist schools, particularly the Gelug school of the Dalai Lamas. Vajrabhairava is typically depicted in an even more elaborate and fierce form than Hindu Bhairava. He has multiple heads, often 9 or 34, with the face of a buffalo at the center, representing his conquest of death itself. He has many arms, usually 34, holding an array of weapons and implements. He has multiple legs, usually 16, trampling upon various beings representing obstacles to enlightenment. His appearance is profoundly terrifying, meant to embody the ultimate wrathful power of enlightened consciousness. The buffalo head is particularly significant. In Hindu tradition, Yama, the god of death, rides a buffalo. By displaying a buffalo head, Vajrabhairava symbolizes his conquest of death itself. He is the destroyer of the destroyer, the one who has transcended even the power that all other beings must bow before. This is similar to Bhairava's role as Kala Bhairava, the Lord of Time who transcends time itself. The mythology surrounding Vajrabhairava's origin is distinctly Buddhist, but shows clear connections to Hindu Bhairava traditions. According to Buddhist texts, a powerful demon named Yama was terrorizing the world, killing humans and preventing them from practicing Dharma. The gods tried to stop this demon but failed. Finally, the Buddha Manjushri, the embodiment of transcendent wisdom, manifested in the fierce form of Yamantaka to confront and defeat this demon. Manjushri took on the appearance of Yama himself, but multiplied and intensified. More heads, more arms, more terrifying features. When Yama saw this being who looked like himself, but infinitely more powerful, he was overwhelmed and submitted. Yamantaka then transformed Yama's harmful energy into protective energy, making him a Dharmapala, a protector of Buddhist teachings. This story follows a familiar pattern in Buddhist mythology where fierce deities are not inherently evil, but represent powerful forces that need to be tamed and redirected. Yamantaka does not destroy Yama, but transforms him, just as Buddhist practice aims to transform negative mental states rather than simply suppressing them. In Buddhist practice, Vajrabhairava, Yamantaka represents the wrathful aspect of wisdom itself. He is sometimes described as the flip side of Manjushri, the peaceful deity of wisdom. Where Manjushri cuts through ignorance with the gentle sword of discriminating awareness, Vajrabhairava annihilates it with overwhelming force. Both approaches serve the same ultimate purpose: the destruction of delusion and the revelation of enlightened consciousness. The practices associated with Vajrabhairava are considered advanced and powerful. They typically require extensive preliminary training and formal initiation from a qualified teacher. Practitioners visualize themselves as Vajrabhairava, identifying with his fierce energy and using that identification to transform their own consciousness. The complex iconography becomes a map of the enlightened mind, with each element representing a different aspect of wisdom or skillful means. These practices are not undertaken lightly. Tibetan Buddhist teachers emphasize that tantric practices involving fierce deities require stable ethical foundations, significant meditation experience, and proper understanding of Buddhist philosophy. Without these prerequisites, the practices can be destabilizing or harmful. This mirrors the Kapalika understanding that transgressive or intense practices require careful preparation. But when properly undertaken, Vajrabhairava practice is said to be extremely effective for rapid spiritual progress. The intensity of the visualization, the power of the deity, and the radical identification with wrathful wisdom create conditions for breakthrough experiences. Obstacles that might take years to overcome through gentler practices can be burned away in the blazing fire of Vajrabhairava consciousness. Another Buddhist manifestation related to Bhairava is Heruka, particularly in the form of Chakrasamvara. While not always directly identified with Bhairava, Heruka shares many characteristics: multiple heads and arms, fierce appearance, dancing posture, association with cremation grounds, and union with his consort, Vajravarahi. Some scholars see Heruka as another Buddhist adaptation of Hindu Bhairava, while others see independent development with parallel symbolism. Heruka practice, like Vajrabhairava practice, belongs to the highest tantric class in Tibetan Buddhism. It emphasizes the transformation of desire and attachment into wisdom and compassion. The fierce form represents the intensity required to truly transmute these powerful energies rather than merely suppressing them. The union with the consort symbolizes the integration of wisdom and compassion, of emptiness and bliss, of the masculine and feminine principles. In both Vajrabhairava and Heruka practices, we see themes familiar from Hindu Bhairava worship: the use of fierce forms to represent powerful spiritual truths, the deliberate cultivation of intense energy states, the willingness to work with what mainstream religion might consider dangerous or impure, and the understanding that spiritual transformation requires destroying comfortable illusions. The iconographic parallels between Hindu Bhairava and Buddhist Vajrabhairava are striking. Both carry tridents. Both are associated with skulls and corpses. Both dwell in cremation grounds. Both are depicted with fierce expressions and multiple weapons. Both have consorts with whom they are shown in union, and both are understood to represent the transformation of death into liberation. But there are also significant differences that reflect the distinct philosophical frameworks of the two traditions. Hindu Bhairava, particularly in Kashmir Shaivism, represents the supreme consciousness itself, the ultimate reality from which all existence emanates. Buddhist Vajrabhairava, while profoundly important, is understood as a manifestation or emanation rather than ultimate reality. He arises from emptiness and returns to emptiness, as do all phenomena in Buddhist understanding. Hindu Bhairava is intimately connected to Shiva and cannot really be understood apart from that relationship. He is Shiva's fierce form, Shiva's tactical manifestation, always referring back to Shiva as the source. Buddhist Vajrabhairava is an emanation of Manjushri and ultimately of the Dharmakaya, the true body of all Buddhas. The conceptual framework is entirely Buddhist, even though the imagery shows clear Hindu influence. Hindu Bhairava worship centers on devotion, bhakti, identification through yoga and meditation, and recognition of one's essential nature as Bhairava consciousness. Buddhist Vajrabhairava practice emphasizes visualization, mantra recitation, identification with the deity as a method for transformation, and ultimately recognizing the empty nature of both the deity and oneself. The techniques overlap, but the ultimate goals are framed differently. These differences matter, but so do the similarities. Both traditions recognize that gentle, peaceful deities and practices are not sufficient for all purposes or all practitioners. Both understand that sometimes what is needed is not calm contemplation but fierce confrontation, not gradual cultivation but sudden annihilation of obstacles. Both see wisdom in the terrifying forms. Both find liberation through what initially appears as destruction. The transmission of Bhairava into Buddhism also reveals patterns of religious exchange in South and Central Asia. As Buddhism moved through regions where Hindu traditions were strong, it encountered and absorbed elements that resonated with its own teachings. The fierce deity traditions were particularly amenable to this absorption because they addressed similar spiritual needs: protection from obstacles, rapid transformation of consciousness, and the harnessing of powerful energies for spiritual purposes. In Tibet specifically, where Buddhism encountered the indigenous Bon religion with its own fierce deity traditions, Vajrabhairava and related figures found fertile ground. The Tibetan imagination, shaped by the harsh high-altitude environment and by pre-Buddhist spiritual traditions, was perhaps especially receptive to deities who embodied raw power and uncompromising ferocity. Vajrabhairava became one of the most important yidam deities, personal meditation deities that practitioners identify with as part of their path to enlightenment. The great Tibetan monasteries developed elaborate systems of Vajrabhairava practice. Monks spent years mastering the visualizations, memorizing the mantras, learning the ritual procedures, and receiving the necessary initiations. The practices were preserved and transmitted with great care, maintaining lineages that traced back through generations of teachers. When Tibetan Buddhism spread beyond Tibet into Mongolia, Bhutan, and other regions, Vajrabhairava traveled with it. Today, you can find Vajrabhairava thankas, statues, and practices throughout the Tibetan Buddhist world, from monasteries in exile in India to temples in Mongolia, from Dharma centers in America to practice communities in Europe. Contemporary practitioners of Tibetan Buddhism continue to engage with Vajrabhairava practices under the guidance of authorized teachers. These are not museum pieces or historical curiosities, but living traditions that practitioners believe offer genuine pathways to transformation and enlightenment. The fierce deity who originated as Bhairava in Hindu tradition continues to serve spiritual purposes in his Buddhist form. There is an interesting question about how much the original Hindu Bhairava worshippers and the Buddhist Vajrabhairava practitioners would have recognized as common ground. In regions where both traditions coexisted, was there mutual influence, cross-fertilization of practices and understandings? Did Hindu tantrics learn from Buddhist tantrics, and vice versa? The historical evidence suggests yes, that the boundary between Hindu and Buddhist tantra was often quite porous, with practices and deities flowing across sectarian lines. This pattern of exchange challenges simple narratives about religious conflict or incompatibility. Here we have a Hindu deity adopted into Buddhism, transformed to fit Buddhist frameworks, and used successfully for Buddhist purposes, while simultaneously continuing to function in Hindu contexts. This suggests that at certain levels of spiritual practice, doctrinal differences become less important than functional effectiveness. If a practice works, if a deity helps practitioners transform their consciousness and remove obstacles, then sectarian identity matters less than spiritual results. In the Newar Buddhism of Nepal, we find yet another context where Hindu and Buddhist Bhairava traditions intermingle. The Newari people, with their unique syncretic religious tradition that blends Hindu and Buddhist elements, worship various forms of Bhairava that don't fit neatly into either category. The Newari Bhairava deities protect the city of Kathmandu and surrounding areas, much as Kala Bhairava protects Varanasi, but are venerated by both Hindus and Buddhists. This syncretic approach represents perhaps the most interesting way that Bhairava transcends religious boundaries. Rather than being purely Hindu or purely Buddhist, in some contexts Bhairava becomes a community deity whose protection and power are accessed by everyone regardless of their sectarian affiliation. The fierce guardian of cosmic boundaries becomes, in practice, a figure who crosses and blurs religious boundaries. The Buddhist adoption and transformation of Bhairava also highlights something important about the nature of fierce deities themselves. These are not figures of simple aggression or meaningless violence. They represent powerful spiritual principles that can be articulated in different religious languages. Whether you call him Kala Bhairava or Vajra Bhairava or Yamantaka, whether you understand him as Shiva's fierce form or as Manjushri's wrathful manifestation, the underlying reality being pointed to is similar: a fierce, uncompromising, utterly honest confrontation with illusion, ego, and the fear of death. Both Hindu and Buddhist practitioners would agree that this confrontation is necessary, that spiritual maturity requires moving beyond childish needs for comfort and reassurance, that genuine transformation involves a kind of death and rebirth. The specific theological frameworks differ, but the existential truth they are addressing is universal. In contemporary spiritual practice, we sometimes see practitioners who draw on both Hindu and Buddhist Bhairava traditions, recognizing that each offers valuable techniques and insights. While traditional teachers might caution against mixing traditions carelessly, there is also recognition that the fierce deity wisdom transcends any single religious framework. The story of Bhairava's journey from Hindu mythology into Buddhist practice is ultimately a story about how profound spiritual truths find expression across cultural and religious boundaries. It demonstrates that the fierce wisdom embodied by Bhairava addresses needs and possibilities that are not limited to any single tradition, but speak to something universal in human spiritual development: the way of worship, rituals, mantras, and devotional practice. For all the philosophical sophistication of Kashmir Shaivism and the elaborate visualizations of Tibetan Buddhism, much of Bhairava worship happens at a simpler, more devotional level. Millions of ordinary devotees who may never study advanced philosophy or undertake intensive tantric practices still turn to Bhairava in their daily lives, seeking his protection, asking for his blessings, honoring his fierce grace. Understanding how Bhairava is actually worshipped on the ground, in temples and homes, in daily rituals and annual festivals, gives us a different but equally important perspective on his significance. This is Bhairava as he lives in the hearts and practices of regular devotees rather than in scholarly texts or advanced meditation halls. The most basic form of Bhairava worship is darshan, simply viewing the deity's image with devotion. Devotees visit Bhairava temples, stand before his form, gaze upon his fierce countenance, and receive his blessing through this visual contact. In Hinduism, darshan is understood as a two-way seeing. We see the deity, but the deity also sees us. In that mutual seeing, something is transmitted, some grace is conveyed. At the Kala Bhairava temple in Varanasi, devotees line up throughout the day to receive darshan. They bring offerings, they bow before the deity, they stand for a moment in his presence. Some weep, overcome with emotion. Some stand silently, absorbing the energy of the sacred space. Some speak their problems aloud, asking Bhairava to help, trusting that he hears and will respond. The offerings made to Bhairava are distinctive. While typical Hindu worship involves flowers, fruits, and sweets, Bhairava is also offered items that reflect his fierce nature. Alcohol is commonly offered, poured into the skull bowl at his feet or into cups placed before his image. This practice horrifies Orthodox Hindus who would never bring alcohol into a temple, but for Bhairava devotees, it is an appropriate offering to a deity who transcends conventional purity codes. Meat offerings are also traditional in some Bhairava temples, again violating standard Hindu temple practice where only vegetarian offerings are acceptable. Fish, chicken, or goat may be offered, acknowledging Bhairava's association with transgressive practices and his acceptance of devotees from all backgrounds, including those whose cultures traditionally include meat eating. Coconuts are another common offering, though for different reasons. The coconut is said to represent the human head or ego. By breaking the coconut before Bhairava, devotees symbolically break their own ego, offering their false sense of separate self to be destroyed by his fierce grace. The breaking of the coconut makes a sharp, definitive sound, a moment of destruction that mirrors the sudden shattering of ego that Bhairava's presence can bring. The lighting of oil lamps and incense is standard in Bhairava worship as in all Hindu rituals, creating an atmosphere of sanctity and focus. The flames represent the burning away of ignorance, the light of consciousness dispelling darkness. The smoke carries prayers upward, making visible the invisible channel between human and divine. Mantra recitation is central to Bhairava worship. Mantras are sacred sounds that are believed to embody the deity's power, to be vehicles for accessing divine energy. By repeating a mantra with devotion and concentration, practitioners attune themselves to the deity's frequency, opening themselves to receive blessings and transformations. The primary Bhairava mantra, chanted by millions of devotees, is Om Reem Badakaya Apadinaya Kuru Kuru Badakaya Reem. This mantra invokes Bhairava's power to remove obstacles and protect from dangers. The seed syllable Reem is associated with transformative power and with the divine feminine, connecting Bhairava to Shakti. The term Badakaya refers to Bhairava in his Batuk form, a particularly protective aspect. Another important mantra is Om Kalabhairavaya Nama. This simple mantra means Om, salutations to Kala Bhairava, directly invoking the Lord of Time. It can be chanted alone or as part of longer practices, repeated 108 times or more, using a mala or prayer beads to count repetitions. More elaborate mantras exist for specific forms of Bhairava and for specific purposes. Advanced practitioners may receive secret mantras from their gurus, sounds that are not meant to be shared publicly but are transmitted as part of an initiatory lineage. These secret mantras are believed to carry particular power precisely because they have been charged with the energy of the lineage, empowered by generations of practitioners who have used them to achieve realization. The correct pronunciation of mantras is considered important, though not in a rigid or anxious way. The sound itself carries power, and faithful repetition, even by someone who doesn't understand Sanskrit, is believed to have an effect. Devotion and sincerity matter more than perfect technique. Chanting or singing devotional songs to Bhairava is another common practice. These bhajans and kirtans create an atmosphere of collective devotion, joining individual worshippers into a community unified in their focus on the deity. The repetitive melodies and choruses induce trance-like states where ordinary consciousness softens and something deeper can emerge. At certain temples, particularly on special occasions, more elaborate ritual worship called puja is performed. Trained priests follow prescribed procedures, offering specific items in a specific sequence, reciting specific mantras, performing specific gestures. These elaborate rituals follow ancient patterns believed to be particularly pleasing and effective in invoking the deity's presence and blessing. But Bhairava worship also allows for spontaneous, informal devotion. You don't need a priest or a temple. You can pray to Bhairava anywhere, anytime, simply by turning your attention to him with sincerity. Many devotees speak to Bhairava in their own words, sharing their problems and hopes as they would with a trusted friend or protective father. This personal, conversational style of devotion is completely acceptable and is believed to be heard by Bhairava just as clearly as formal Sanskrit prayers. The annual festival of Bhairava Ashtami holds special significance. This day, which occurs on the 8th lunar day of the month of Margashirsha, November-December, or of the dark fortnight in various months, depending on regional tradition, is dedicated specifically to Bhairava worship. Devotees fast, visit Bhairava temples, perform special pujas, and receive blessings. The Kala Bhairava temple in Varanasi sees enormous crowds on this day, with pilgrims traveling from throughout India to receive darshan on this auspicious occasion. On Bhairava Ashtami, the practice of feeding dogs takes on special importance. We have already discussed the significance of the dog as Bhairava's vehicle, but on this day, the practice becomes widespread and intentional. Devotees prepare special food and seek out dogs to feed them, seeing in this act a direct form of worshipping Bhairava. Stray dogs in areas with large Hindu populations often find themselves particularly well fed on Bhairava Ashtami. Tuesdays and Sundays are also considered auspicious for Bhairava worship, and regular devotees may visit temples or perform home pujas on these days. Tuesday is associated with Mars and with fierce, protective energies. Sunday is associated with the sun and with divine power. Both days align with Bhairava's nature. Home worship of Bhairava is common among dedicated devotees. They may keep a small image or picture of Bhairava in their home shrine, offering daily prayers, lighting lamps, and performing simple rituals. This domestic practice keeps Bhairava's presence woven into daily life rather than confined to occasional temple visits. The practice of circumambulation, walking clockwise around the temple or around the city in Bhairava's honor, is another form of devotion. The physical act of walking, the repetition of steps, the dedication of bodily energy to sacred purpose, all create conditions for spiritual opening. Pilgrims who undertake the Ashtanga Bhairava Yatra, visiting all 8 Bhairava temples around Varanasi, engage in this practice of sacred circumambulation. Some devotees undertake vows or vrata for Bhairava, committing to specific practices for a set period. This might include daily recitation of specific mantras, fasting on certain days, abstaining from certain activities, or performing specific charitable acts. The vow creates discipline and focus, intensifying spiritual practice and demonstrating commitment to Bhairava. When devotees feel they have received special help from Bhairava, a problem solved, a danger averted, a disease healed, they often return to the temple to offer thanksgiving. This might take the form of special offerings, donations to the temple, or fulfillment of promises made during the time of difficulty. If you help me, I will do this, and then, when help comes, the grateful devotee follows through. The relationship between Bhairava devotees and their deity is often deeply personal. They speak of feeling Bhairava's protective presence in their lives, of sensing his guidance in difficult moments, of experiencing his grace in unexpected ways. These subjective experiences, whether interpreted as psychological or as genuinely supernatural, give Bhairava worship its living quality. He is not an abstract concept but a felt presence, not a distant deity but an intimate protector. Critics sometimes accuse Bhairava worship of being superstitious or primitive, mere propitiation of a frightening deity out of fear. This criticism misunderstands what is actually happening. Sophisticated Bhairava devotees understand that they are not bribing or appeasing an external entity, but rather accessing an aspect of divine consciousness through forms and practices that resonate with their psychological and spiritual needs. The rituals create focus, the mantras quiet the restless mind, the offerings express devotion, and through these practices, transformation becomes possible. Even simple devotional acts can be understood at multiple levels. Offering alcohol to Bhairava can be seen as simply giving what the deity traditionally receives. It can also be understood as symbolically offering one's intoxicated, confused ego consciousness to be transformed by divine wisdom. It can represent the willingness to include rather than exclude, to bring everything, even what is usually considered profane, into relationship with the sacred. All these understandings can coexist in the mind and heart of a thoughtful practitioner. The accessibility of Bhairava worship is one of its great strengths. You don't need to be a scholar, a yogi, or an advanced practitioner. You can approach Bhairava as you are, with whatever problems and limitations you carry, and receive his blessing. The fierce appearance that might seem forbidding actually becomes welcoming once you understand that Bhairava's fierceness is directed at your suffering, not at you, at your delusions, not at your essential being. The teachings in the Terror, Bhairava's philosophical message. Beneath all the rituals, iconography, mythology, and devotional practices, Bhairava embodies a set of profound philosophical teachings. These teachings address fundamental questions about the nature of reality, the meaning of death, the possibility of freedom, and the path to authentic spiritual realization. Let us extract and examine these core teachings, understanding Bhairava not just as a deity to worship, but as a philosophical position made manifest, a set of existential insights given form. The teaching of time. As Kala Bhairava, the Lord of Time, Bhairava's first teaching concerns our relationship with temporality. Time is not merely an abstract dimension in which events occur. Time is the destroyer, the force that consumes everything we build, everyone we love, every achievement we accomplish. Nothing escapes time. Nothing lasts forever. The body ages and dies. Relationships end. Civilizations rise and fall. Even the gods themselves are subject to cycles of manifestation and dissolution. Most people try to ignore this reality. We build our lives as if they will last forever. We make plans as if we have unlimited time. We clutch at moments of pleasure, trying to freeze them, refusing to accept their inherent transience. This refusal to accept impermanence is the root of immense suffering. Bhairava teaches us to face time directly, to acknowledge death not as an unfortunate fact to be avoided, but as the most important truth we need to understand. In accepting impermanence, in truly internalizing the reality of death, we are paradoxically freed from its terror. When we stop pretending that things will last forever, we can actually engage with them more fully in the present. When we accept that we will die, we can actually begin to live authentically. This is why Bhairava is associated with cremation grounds, where the reality of death cannot be avoided. The cremation ground is the place of ultimate honesty, where all social pretensions fall away, where rich and poor become the same ash, where the beautiful body and the ugly body both decompose. Meditating in the cremation ground, traditional ascetics confronted death directly, using its reality to cut through their attachments and delusions. Kala Bhairava is not merely time, but the transcendence of time. He is called the Lord of Time because he has mastered it, because he exists beyond its reach even while operating within it. This points to a deeper teaching. There is something in us that is not subject to time, not touched by death. Our true nature, our fundamental consciousness, was not born and will not die. By identifying with this eternal aspect rather than with the time-bound body-mind, we discover our freedom. The teaching of ego death, the garland of skulls around Bhairava's neck, the severed head of Brahma in his hand, the cremation ground setting, all of these point to another central teaching. The ego must die. Not in some metaphorical, gentle sense, but in a real, experiential sense. The constructed self, the social identity, the story we tell about who we are, all of this must be seen through and released. This teaching is harsh, but necessary. Most spiritual seeking is actually ego seeking in disguise. We want to become enlightened, to achieve realization, to be someone special. But this very wanting, this very seeking, comes from the ego that is the problem. As long as I am trying to achieve liberation, liberation cannot happen, because the I is precisely what must be liberated from. Bhairava's fierce form represents what true spiritual transformation actually requires. It requires a willingness to die psychologically, to let go of everything we think defines us, to step into the unknown without the security of our familiar self-concept. This is terrifying, which is why Bhairava appears terrifying. His appearance accurately reflects the experience of ego death. But on the other side of this death lies freedom. When the false self is seen through, when the ego structure collapses, what remains is the boundless awareness that was always present but was hidden by our identification with the limited self. This is not a loss but a finding, not a death but a birth. Or more accurately, it is both simultaneously. The teaching of non-duality. In Kashmir Shaivism's understanding, Bhairava represents the supreme consciousness that includes and transcends all dualities. There is ultimately no separation between sacred and profane, pure and impure, good and evil, self and other. These dualities are conventional designations, useful for navigating relative reality, but not ultimately true. This teaching is not moral relativism or nihilism. It is not saying that distinctions don't matter in everyday life or that ethical behavior is unimportant. Rather, it is saying that at the deepest level of reality, beyond all categories and concepts, there is a unity that includes and reconciles all apparent opposites. Bhairava's willingness to violate purity codes, his dwelling in cremation grounds, his association with transgressive practices, all of these express this teaching. By embracing what society rejects, by finding the sacred in the profane, by discovering enlightenment in the cremation ground, Bhairava demonstrates that consciousness is not limited to conventionally pure forms, but is equally present everywhere. This teaching liberates us from the exhausting effort to be always pure, always good, always proper. It allows us to accept all aspects of our experience without judgment, to work with our anger and desire rather than merely suppressing them, to include our shadow rather than pretending it doesn't exist. In this inclusion and acceptance, transformation becomes possible. The teaching of fear. Bhairava's very name means the terrifying one, yet he is worshipped by millions. This apparent contradiction points to a teaching about the nature of fear itself. What we fear most is often what we most need to face. Our terrors mark the boundaries of our current understanding, the edge beyond which our comfortable worldview cannot extend. Spiritual growth requires crossing these boundaries, facing these fears, going beyond our comfort zone into the unknown. Bhairava embodies this process. He is deliberately frightening because the spiritual path is frightening. Anyone who claims otherwise is either lying or has not gone deep enough. But Bhairava also teaches that fear itself is not the problem. Fear is a natural response to the unknown, a signal that we are approaching the edge of our current capacity. The problem is not fear, but our relationship with fear, our belief that we must avoid whatever frightens us, our assumption that fear means danger. In fact, the path to freedom often leads directly through what we fear most. By facing our terrors with awareness rather than fleeing from them, by moving toward what frightens us rather than away from it, by learning to remain present even while afraid, we discover that fear has no ultimate power over us. This is why Bhairava devotees learn to face his terrifying form with devotion rather than avoidance. The practice of meeting fear with love transforms both. The teaching of destruction as compassion. Bhairava is a destroyer, and destruction in spiritual context is actually an act of compassion. What Bhairava destroys is not our true nature, but our false understanding, not our essence, but our delusions, not what we really are, but what we mistakenly think we are. When Bhairava destroys ego, he is freeing us from prison. When he destroys attachments, he is releasing us from bondage. When he destroys comfortable illusions, he is giving us the gift of reality. This destruction may be painful, but it is ultimately beneficial. It is like surgery that must be cut in order to heal, or like a forest fire that clears dead wood so new growth can flourish. Understanding this changes how we relate to the destructive processes in our lives. When everything falls apart, when we lose what we valued, when our carefully constructed life plans collapse, we can recognize this as Bhairava's grace rather than as mere misfortune. Not every destruction is beneficial, of course, but many of the destructions we experience, if met with awareness, can become opportunities for profound transformation. The teaching of the guardian at the threshold, Bhairava's role as the Kotwal of Kashi, the guardian who stands at the threshold of the sacred city, represents another crucial teaching. There are thresholds in spiritual life, boundaries that must be crossed, gates that must be passed through. And at these thresholds stand guardians, whether we understand them as external beings or as aspects of our own psyche, that test our readiness. Bhairava tests us. His fierce appearance, his demanding nature, his refusal to accept pretense or half measures. All of these serve as tests. Can we face him? Can we meet his gaze? Can we be honest before the one who sees through all deception? If not, we are not yet ready for what lies beyond the threshold he guards. But if we can meet his test, if we can stand before him with honesty and courage, then he becomes not an obstacle but a protector. He guards us against our own tendency to retreat, to compromise, to settle for less than authentic realization. He ensures that we do not enter sacred space carrying the profane attitudes that would pollute it. The teaching of devotion beyond understanding. Finally, despite all the philosophical sophistication surrounding Bhairava, there remains a teaching about simple devotion that transcends understanding. The dog at Bhairava's feet represents this. Complete loyalty, unwavering trust, love that does not require reasons or explanations. Sometimes the most profound spiritual response is not complex philosophy, but simple devotion. Sometimes what we need is not to understand, but to surrender, not to figure out, but to trust, not to achieve, but to receive. Bhairava, for all his terrifying appearance, accepts such devotion and responds to it with protection and grace. This teaching balances the others. While we engage in philosophical inquiry, while we work to understand, while we practice disciplines and follow paths, ultimately we are called to a relationship with the divine that transcends all of this. We are called to love what is beyond our comprehension, to trust what we cannot control, to give ourselves to what we can never fully grasp. These teachings, woven through the mythology and iconography and practices of Bhairava worship, offer a comprehensive philosophy for engaging with existence in its fullest and most honest sense. They do not comfort or reassure. They do not make things easier or more pleasant. But they offer something more valuable: the possibility of genuine transformation, authentic freedom, and the kind of life that comes from facing reality without flinching. Bhairava in the modern world. The ancient deity who emerged from Shiva's fury millennia ago continues to be a living presence in contemporary life. Bhairava has not become a mere historical artifact or a museum piece, but remains actively worshipped, sincerely believed in, and experientially encountered by millions of people today. Understanding how Bhairava functions in the modern world helps us appreciate his enduring relevance. In Varanasi, the Kala Bhairava temple continues to draw pilgrims from throughout India and increasingly from around the world. On any given day, you will find a mix of traditional devotees, elderly women making their daily rounds of sacred sites, priests performing elaborate rituals, families seeking blessings for children or sick relatives, alongside younger Indians curious about their spiritual heritage and Western spiritual seekers drawn to Hinduism's more esoteric dimensions. The temple itself is a functioning religious institution supported by donations from devotees, maintained by a staff of priests, integrated into the religious life of the city. The rituals continue much as they have for centuries. The morning ablutions of the deity, the offering of prayers and food throughout the day, the evening arati with bells and flames and chanted verses. This continuity across time is itself significant, demonstrating that modernity has not displaced traditional religiosity but exists alongside it. But Bhairava worship has also adapted to contemporary contexts. Online devotion has become common, with websites and social media pages dedicated to Bhairava offering virtual darshan through photographs and videos, sharing mantras and prayers, creating communities of devotees who may never meet physically but are united in their devotion. During the COVID-19 pandemic, when physical temple visits were restricted, online Bhairava Puja became a primary way for many devotees to maintain their practice. Smartphone apps now offer Bhairava mantras, allow users to perform virtual puja, send notifications on auspicious days for Bhairava worship, and provide educational content about his mythology and significance. These technological adaptations make Bhairava accessible in new ways while potentially changing the nature of devotional practice itself. The full effects of this digital transformation remain to be seen. Bhairava's fierce symbolism has found resonance with certain contemporary movements and individuals. Some modern tantric practitioners, both Indian and Western, have been drawn to Bhairava as representing an alternative to what they see as overly domesticated, sanitized versions of spirituality. They appreciate his transgressive elements, his refusal to conform to social respectability, his insistence on confronting what most people prefer to avoid. This can sometimes lead to misappropriation, where Bhairava's symbolism is adopted superficially without understanding or engaging with the deeper teachings. The dark aesthetic, the skulls and weapons, the association with the forbidden, these can be taken out of context and used to project a certain image rather than serving genuine spiritual transformation. Traditional practitioners sometimes view these adaptations with concern, worried that the sacred is being trivialized. At the same time, genuine Western practitioners of Hindu Tantra and Kashmir Shaivism have formed serious relationships with Bhairava, studying under qualified teachers, undertaking disciplined practice, and experiencing real transformation. Teachers like Mark Dixkowski and Paul Muller-Ortega have helped make Kashmir Shaivism's Bhairava teachings accessible to Western students while maintaining scholarly rigor and respect for tradition. In contemporary India, Bhairava continues to serve protective and practical functions in people's lives. Businesses keep Bhairava images to ward off theft and ensure prosperity. Travelers pray to Bhairava for safe journeys. Those facing legal difficulties or dangerous situations invoke his protection. This practical, results-oriented devotion exists alongside more philosophical or mystical approaches, demonstrating the multi-layered nature of Hindu religiosity. The practice of feeding dogs in Bhairava's honor has, in some contexts, evolved into a form of animal rights activism. Organizations dedicated to caring for stray dogs sometimes frame their work in explicitly religious terms, as serving Bhairava through his vehicle. This creates a bridge between traditional religious devotion and contemporary humanitarian concerns, showing how ancient practices can take on new meanings. Bhairava appears in contemporary Indian art, literature, and popular culture, though not as prominently as more mainstream deities like Krishna, Ganesha, or Durga. When he does appear, it is often in contexts that emphasize his fierce, protective qualities or his association with esoteric knowledge. The relative rarity of these appearances actually preserves something of his boundary-crossing nature. Bhairava remains somewhat apart from mainstream religious culture, occupying a liminal space that is part of his essential character. The philosophical teachings associated with Bhairava, particularly those from Kashmir Shaivism, have found interest among Western philosophers and consciousness researchers. The non-dualistic framework, the emphasis on direct experience over dogma, the sophisticated analysis of consciousness and manifestation. These resonate with contemporary explorations in phenomenology, consciousness studies, and contemplative practice research. Organizations like the Rubin Museum of Art in New York have hosted exhibitions featuring fierce deities, including Bhairava, introducing these images to audiences who might never encounter them otherwise. These exhibitions typically contextualize the imagery within Tibetan Buddhist practice, explaining the philosophical and soteriological functions of fierce deity visualization. The challenge is presenting this material in ways that neither sensationalize nor sanitize it, that respect its sacred origins while making it comprehensible to secular audiences. In therapeutic contexts, some practitioners have begun exploring how the Bhairava archetype might serve psychological functions. Jungian analysts have noted parallels between Bhairava and the shadow or the self in analytical psychology. Trauma therapists have considered how practices involving fierce deities might help clients access and integrate disowned or repressed aspects of psyche. These applications remain mostly experimental and controversial, raising questions about cultural appropriation and about whether religious symbols can be effectively translated into psychological frameworks. Climate change and environmental degradation have prompted some Hindus to emphasize ecological dimensions of their tradition, and Bhairava has occasionally appeared in these discussions. As the Lord of Time who witnesses the cycles of creation and destruction, as the one who accepts impermanence and death as natural processes, Bhairava can be seen as embodying a perspective that humanity desperately needs in the face of ecological crisis. We must face the destruction we have caused, accept the changes that can no longer be avoided, and find meaning and purpose within a context of inevitable loss. These are quintessentially Bhairava tasks. The persistence of Bhairava worship in urban India presents an interesting phenomenon. As India modernizes, as cities grow and traditional structures change, as younger generations become more secular and globally connected, one might expect traditional religious practices to decline. Yet Bhairava temples continue to thrive, and in some cases are experiencing renewed interest. This suggests that whatever Bhairava represents continues to address real human needs that modernity does not eliminate. Perhaps in an age of anxiety, uncertainty, and rapid change, the figure of Bhairava, who embodies the acceptance of impermanence and the transcendence of fear, becomes more rather than less relevant. Perhaps in a world that often feels out of control, the fierce protector who guards boundaries and destroys obstacles offers genuine psychological benefit. Perhaps in an era where traditional identities are dissolving and individuals must construct meaning for themselves, the teaching of ego death and the recognition of consciousness beyond personality speaks to contemporary experience. Young professionals in Indian cities, facing the pressures of competitive careers and uncertain futures, sometimes turn to Bhairava seeking strength and protection. They may not interpret the mythology literally, may not believe in the anthropomorphic deity in the same way their grandparents did, but they find something valuable in the practices, the symbolism, the psychological space that Bhairava worship creates. This represents not a decline of tradition, but its evolution, its adaptation to new contexts while retaining essential functions. The global spread of yoga and meditation has also created pathways for Bhairava to reach new audiences. Western practitioners who begin with relatively gentle practices like hatha yoga or mindfulness meditation sometimes eventually encounter tantric traditions and through them meet Bhairava. For these practitioners, Bhairava may function less as a deity in the traditional sense and more as an archetypal symbol or a representation of certain psychological and spiritual realities. This translation across cultural contexts is fraught with challenges. How much can be adapted without losing essential meaning? When does interpretation become misappropriation? These questions don't have easy answers, and thoughtful practitioners on all sides acknowledge the complexities. What seems clear is that something about Bhairava, whether understood theologically, psychologically, philosophically, or mythologically, continues to exert fascination and to serve functions for contemporary practitioners. Academic study of Bhairava has expanded significantly in recent decades, with scholars of religion, anthropology, art history, and philosophy all contributing to our understanding of this complex deity. This scholarship has helped recover historical practices, trace the evolution of Bhairava traditions, and analyze the functions these traditions serve. It has also sometimes been criticized by traditional practitioners who feel that academic analysis misses essential experiential dimensions that can only be understood through practice. The tension between scholarly and devotional approaches to Bhairava is itself instructive. Scholars want to understand objectively, to analyze without commitment, to maintain critical distance. Devotees want to experience subjectively, to engage with full commitment, to allow transformation through an intimate relationship. Both approaches offer value, and both have limitations. Perhaps Bhairava himself, as the one who transcends all categories and boundaries, would appreciate being approached from multiple directions simultaneously. Contemporary art inspired by Bhairava ranges from traditional Thanka paintings and temple sculptures created by trained artisans maintaining ancient techniques to modern and postmodern works that reimagine him through contemporary aesthetic sensibilities. Some contemporary Indian artists have used Bhairava imagery to comment on violence, death, and social breakdown, finding in the ancient deity a vocabulary for addressing contemporary horrors. These artistic appropriations sometimes disturb traditional devotees, but also demonstrate Bhairava's continuing cultural relevance. In diaspora communities, where Indians living abroad work to maintain cultural and religious connections, Bhairava worship sometimes becomes a marker of identity and continuity. Temple communities in North America, Europe, and Australia that include Bhairava shrines create spaces where traditional practices can continue far from their original contexts. For second and third generation diaspora Hindus, these temples and practices become links to ancestral traditions, ways of maintaining connection to a heritage that might otherwise be lost. The question of how Bhairava traditions will evolve in the 21st century remains open. Will they continue much as they have, with gradual adaptations, but essential continuity? Will they undergo more radical transformations as they engage with modernity, secularism, and global interchange? Will they decline as younger generations turn away from traditional religion? Or will they experience renewal as people rediscover the depth and power of these ancient paths? Current evidence suggests all of these processes are happening simultaneously in different contexts and communities. Tradition and innovation, continuity and change, preservation and evolution, all coexist in the contemporary Bhairava landscape. This multiplicity seems fitting for a deity who has always embodied contradiction and transcended simple categories. What can be said with confidence is that Bhairava has demonstrated remarkable staying power across many centuries and dramatic social changes. From ancient Puranic mythology through medieval tantric movements to contemporary global spirituality, he has continued to serve functions, to answer needs, to inspire devotion and practice. The fierce deity who emerged from Shiva's wrath to punish Brahma's pride has become a permanent feature of Hindu and Buddhist religious landscapes, adapting to new contexts while maintaining recognizable continuity with ancient forms. For individual practitioners today, whether in India or elsewhere, whether traditional devotees or contemporary seekers, Bhairava offers what he has always offered: the fierce grace that destroys what must be destroyed, the protection that comes from facing fear directly, the freedom that emerges from releasing ego, and the recognition of the consciousness that transcends all temporary forms. These offerings remain as valuable and necessary in the modern world as they were in ancient times. The eternal dance. We have traveled far in our exploration of Bhairava. From his explosive birth in divine fury to his role as eternal guardian of the sacred city, from his 8 manifestations controlling the directions to his elevation as supreme consciousness in Kashmir Shaivism, from the skull-bearing ascetics who imitated his path to his transformation into Buddhist Vajrabhairava, from his elaborate iconography rich with meaning to his simple worship by devoted hearts. We have seen the many faces of this fierce deity. Now, as we approach the end of our journey, it is time to step back and see the whole, to understand how all these aspects fit together into a unified teaching, a complete vision of what Bhairava represents and offers. At the most fundamental level, Bhairava is about transformation through confrontation with truth. He is the aspect of divine consciousness that refuses to look away from what is difficult, painful, or frightening. Where other deities might offer comfort, Bhairava offers honesty. Where other paths might proceed gradually, gently, Bhairava demands radical immediacy. Where other teachings might soften the harsh realities of existence, Bhairava insists we face them directly. This confrontation with truth takes many forms. It is the confrontation with death and impermanence symbolized by the cremation grounds and the skulls. It is the confrontation with ego symbolized by Brahma's severed head and the process of ego death. It is the confrontation with fear symbolized by Bhairava's terrifying appearance itself. It is the confrontation with social conditioning symbolized by his transgression of purity codes and conventional morality. But this confrontation is not punishment or cruelty. It is fierce grace, the love that refuses to allow us to remain trapped in illusion. Bhairava confronts us with truth because that is the only path to genuine freedom. All the comfortable lies, all the soothing evasions, all the ways we avoid looking at reality as it is, these keep us bound. Only truth liberates, even when that truth is harsh. The mythology of Bhairava's origin teaches this lesson clearly. Brahma's false claim, his prideful lie about reaching the top of Shiva's infinite pillar, could not be allowed to stand. Not because Shiva was offended in some petty egoic sense, but because allowing the lie to persist would corrupt the cosmic order itself. Truth must be defended, falseness must be destroyed, even when this requires violence. Bhairava emerges as the defender of truth, the destroyer of falseness, the one who cannot tolerate deception. His subsequent journey, wandering with the skull as his begging bowl, teaches another essential lesson. Even righteous action has consequences that must be borne. Even when we act correctly, even when we serve truth and justice, we are still subject to karma, still responsible for our choices. Bhairava accepts this responsibility fully, undertaking his long penance without complaint or evasion. This models for us the spiritual maturity of taking full ownership of our actions and their consequences. His arrival in Kashi and his release from sin there teaches yet another lesson. There are places, whether understood as physical locations or as states of consciousness, where liberation becomes possible, where burdens can be released, where transformation occurs. The spiritual path is not endless wandering, but has destinations, moments of arrival, experiences of grace that cannot be manufactured through effort alone. His role as the guardian of Kashi, the Kotwal who judges and protects all who enter the sacred city, teaches that transformation requires passage through threshold moments where we are tested, where our readiness is assessed, where we must prove we are prepared for what lies ahead. These threshold moments are both terrifying and necessary. They ensure that we do not proceed to levels of practice or understanding for which we are not yet ready. The 8 manifestations of Bhairava surrounding Kashi teach that divine power operates in all directions, at all levels, addressing all needs. There is no dimension of existence where Bhairava's protective, transformative force is absent. Whether we need creative inspiration or fierce courage, whether we seek knowledge or the power to overcome obstacles, whether we require gentle guidance or devastating destruction, some form of Bhairava can respond. The iconography of Bhairava, his dark color, his fierce eyes, his matted hair, his skull garland, his weapons, his nakedness, his cremation ground setting, all of this serves as visual teaching, a symbolic language that communicates truths difficult to express in words. Every element of his appearance says something about the nature of reality and the path to freedom. Learning to read this symbolic language deepens our understanding and our practice. The dog at his feet teaches that loyalty, simplicity, and devotion are as important as intellectual understanding or sophisticated philosophy. The highest wisdom sometimes expresses itself not in complex thought, but in simple faithfulness, not in philosophical sophistication, but in direct, uncomplicated love. The dog also teaches that Bhairava overturns conventional hierarchies, finding the sacred in what society rejects, elevating the lowly, and revealing divine presence in unexpected places. The Kashmir Shaivite understanding of Bhairava as supreme consciousness itself teaches that what appears as a fierce external deity is actually our own deepest nature. The recognition of Bhairava consciousness is the recognition of what we truly are beneath all the layers of conditioning, identification, and limitation. This teaching transforms the entire spiritual project from achievement to recognition, from becoming to awakening to what already is. The Kapalika tradition teaches that there have always been those willing to take the hardest paths, to embrace the most challenging practices, to go to extremes in pursuit of liberation. These extreme practitioners serve important functions even for those who follow more moderate paths. They demonstrate what is possible. They push boundaries. They explore territories that most people cannot or will not enter, and they bring back insights that benefit the entire community. The Buddhist adoption of Bhairava teaches that profound spiritual truths transcend religious boundaries, that effective methods can be translated across different theological frameworks. The human spiritual needs are universal even when the conceptual systems used to address them vary. Vajrabhairava in Tibetan Buddhism and Bhairava in Hinduism point to the same fundamental realities, use similar methods, and serve similar purposes despite arising from different traditions. The devotional practices surrounding Bhairava, the mantras and offerings, the temple visits and festivals, the personal prayers and collective rituals, teach that spirituality is not only about philosophy and meditation, but also about relationship, emotion, community, and embodied practice. The heart's devotion and the body's ritual action are as important as the mind's understanding. Bhairava receives and responds to all sincere approaches, whether scholarly or devotional, philosophical or practical. The continued relevance of Bhairava in the modern world teaches that ancient wisdom does not become obsolete, that traditional practices can serve contemporary needs, that the fundamental challenges of human existence, death, fear, ego, meaning, remain constant across time and culture. Modernity brings new contexts and new forms, but the underlying human condition that Bhairava addresses has not fundamentally changed. Bringing all these threads together, we can see Bhairava as representing a complete spiritual path, one that begins in confrontation with harsh truths, proceeds through tests and challenges, requires the death of false identity, leads to recognition of our deepest nature, and culminates in a freedom that includes everything, even death, even fear, even destruction, within its embrace. This is not an easy path. Bhairava never promised ease. His appearance alone tells us that this path will be challenging, frightening, and demanding. But it is a path that offers something precious. Genuine transformation rather than spiritual bypassing, authentic liberation rather than temporary consolation, direct realization rather than comforting beliefs. The path of Bhairava is not for everyone, at least not in its most intense forms. Some people are better served by gentler approaches, more gradual methods, less confrontational practices. This is fine. Hinduism and Buddhism both offer many paths, many approaches, many deities and practices suited to different temperaments and capacities. Not everyone needs to become a skull-bearing Kapalika or visualize themselves as Vajrabhairava, but everyone can benefit from what Bhairava represents at a more fundamental level. Everyone needs to face some harsh truths eventually. Everyone must deal with death and impermanence. Everyone struggles with ego and fear. Everyone seeks meaning and freedom. In these universal human concerns, Bhairava offers guidance, protection, and the fierce grace of uncompromising truth. For those who feel called to engage more deeply with Bhairava, whether through formal Hindu or Buddhist practices or through personal spiritual exploration informed by these traditions, the essential requirements are clear: honesty, courage, and willingness. Honesty to see things as they are rather than as we wish they were. Courage to face what we have been avoiding. Willingness to let go of what must be released, to allow transformation even when it is painful, to trust the process even when it is frightening. With these qualities, the fierce deity becomes the most trustworthy of guides. His terror reveals itself as protection, his destruction as liberation, his demands as gifts. Behind the skulls and weapons, behind the dark form and blazing eyes, is the consciousness that is our own deepest nature, calling us home to ourselves through whatever means will work, refusing to let us settle for anything less than complete realization. We stand now at the end of our exploration, having traveled through the mythology, philosophy, practices, and meanings of Bhairava across many centuries and contexts. We have met him in his moment of explosive origin, walked with him through his wandering penance, stood with him as guardian of Kashi, studied his 8 manifestations, decoded his terrifying iconography, understood his sacred dog companion, explored his elevation to supreme consciousness, met his Kapalika imitators, traced his journey into Buddhism, examined his worship and teachings, and considered his continued relevance in the modern world. But understanding is not the same as realization. Knowledge about Bhairava, however comprehensive, is not the same as encountering him, experiencing his transformative power, allowing his fierce grace to work its changes in our own consciousness and life. So the question becomes, what do you do with all this? How do you take this information and make it alive, make it personal, make it transformative rather than merely interesting? The answer will be different for each person, depending on your background, beliefs, temperament, and calling. But some possibilities present themselves. If you feel drawn to Bhairava devotionally, you might begin exploring his worship. This could mean finding a Bhairava temple if you live in a place where such temples exist and visiting it to receive darshan, to make offerings, to sit in his presence. It could mean setting up a small shrine in your home with an image of Bhairava and developing a daily practice of offering, prayer, and mantra recitation. It could mean observing Bhairava Ashtami or other days special to him, fasting and performing puja, feeding dogs in his honor. If you are drawn to Bhairava philosophically, you might begin studying Kashmir Shaivism more deeply, reading the Vijnana Bhairava and other texts, exploring the non-dualistic understanding that identifies Bhairava with supreme consciousness itself. You might begin practicing the meditation techniques described in these texts, experimenting with different doorways into recognizing Bhairava consciousness as your own deepest nature. If you are drawn to Bhairava psychologically, you might work with him as an archetype or symbol in your own inner exploration. You might ask, what harsh truths am I avoiding? What aspects of myself am I rejecting as impure or unacceptable? What deaths of old identities, relationships, patterns am I resisting that need to happen for new life to emerge? You might use Bhairava imagery in meditation or active imagination, encountering him in the cremation ground of your own psyche. If you are Buddhist and drawn to the Vajrabhairava tradition, you might seek out qualified teachers who can provide proper instruction and initiation into these practices. This is not something to be undertaken casually or without guidance, as the practices are powerful and require proper context and support. If you are simply curious, wanting to understand but not necessarily to practice, you might continue exploring the scholarly literature, visiting museums that have Bhairava and Vajrabhairava art, reading accounts by practitioners, deepening your intellectual understanding of these traditions while respecting that they serve purposes beyond intellectual satisfaction for those who engage with them devotionally. Whatever your approach, there are some general principles that honor Bhairava's spirit. Be honest. Don't pretend to understand what you don't understand or feel what you don't feel. Bhairava sees through all deception, starting with self-deception. Better to acknowledge confusion or doubt honestly than to fake certainty or devotion you don't genuinely experience. Be willing to be challenged. If your encounter with Bhairava is comfortable and easy, you are probably not really engaging with what he represents. Expect to be pushed, questioned, stripped of pretenses. Welcome this as grace rather than resisting it as an attack. Be respectful of tradition. Whether you engage with Bhairava within traditional frameworks or adapt his teachings to contemporary contexts, maintain awareness that these are living traditions with long histories and continuing communities of practitioners. Appropriation without respect or understanding causes harm. Be patient with the process. Transformation does not happen on our preferred timeline. Bhairava's fierce appearance might suggest sudden, dramatic change, but profound transformation often requires time to integrate, periods of confusion and disorientation before new clarity emerges. Be willing to include the shadow. Bhairava teaches that nothing is outside the sacred, that even what seems dark or dangerous or impure has its place. This means being willing to acknowledge and work with aspects of yourself and reality that you might prefer to deny or avoid. And most importantly, remember that whatever else Bhairava represents, he fundamentally embodies the principle that fierce honesty, uncompromising truth, and radical acceptance of reality lead to freedom. This principle can be applied at any level, in any context, whether or not you ever engage with Bhairava specifically as a deity or symbol. In your own life, whenever you face harsh truths rather than avoiding them, whenever you let ego die rather than defending it desperately, whenever you move toward fear rather than away from it, whenever you accept impermanence rather than clutching at permanence, whenever you see through comfortable illusions to uncomfortable realities, in these moments, you are living the path that Bhairava represents. The fierce deity with the garland of skulls, standing in the cremation ground with his faithful dog at his feet, holding the trident that pierces through illusion and the drum that beats the rhythm of creation and destruction, gazing with eyes that see all things as they truly are. This is not merely an exotic figure from faraway times and places. This is a possibility that lives within human consciousness itself, within your consciousness, available to be recognized and embodied. Bhairava is the part of you that knows you will die and refuses to live in denial of this fact. He is the part that can look at your worst qualities without flinching. He is the part that is willing to destroy what needs to be destroyed, even if what needs to be destroyed is your cherished self-image. He is the part that cannot be satisfied with comfortable lies, no matter how soothing they might be. But he is also the part that has transcended death through fully accepting it, that has achieved freedom through letting go of everything, that has found the eternal through embracing the temporal, that has discovered bliss on the other side of terror. He is your capacity for complete honesty, radical courage, and ultimate liberation. The question is not whether Bhairava exists. The question is whether you are willing to let him exist in you, whether you are willing to allow the fierce, transformative power he represents to operate in your life, whether you have the courage to walk the path he walked, from the explosive moment of truth-telling through the long process of bearing consequences to the final release into freedom. If you feel that call, if something in this exploration has touched you, if you recognize in Bhairava's fierce form something that you need or that calls to you, then the path is open. The cremation ground awaits. The fierce protector stands ready to guide. The skull that represents both death and liberation rests in his hand. The dog of faithful devotion sits at his feet. The wisdom that destroys ignorance shines in his eyes. All that is required is your willingness to approach, to face him honestly, to accept his challenges, and to trust the process of transformation even when it terrifies you. This is the path of Bhairava, as alive today as it was millennia ago, as available now as it has ever been, waiting for those who have the courage to walk it. Before we close, take a moment to consider, what harsh truth have you been avoiding? What comfortable illusion do you need to see through? What aspect of ego needs to die so that your authentic nature can emerge? These are Bhairava's questions, and they are always relevant, always urgent, always necessary. You don't need to answer them right now, but carry them with you as you move forward. Let them work on you. Let them challenge your certainties and disturb your complacency. Let them be the voice of fierce grace in your life, calling you toward greater honesty, deeper truth, and authentic freedom. The journey with Bhairava never truly ends, because the process of transformation never truly ends. Each level of realization reveals new illusions to be transcended. Each death of the false self reveals another, subtler false self hiding beneath. Each time we think we have faced the ultimate truth, a deeper truth appears. This is not discouraging, but liberating. It means the spiritual life remains alive, dynamic, challenging, and meaningful throughout our entire existence. Bhairava walks with us through all of this, the eternal companion in the cremation ground of transformation, the fierce protector who ensures we never settle for less than we are capable of becoming, the consciousness in which our small consciousness is held and through which it can awaken to its own infinite nature. So we end where we began, in the cremation ground, in the place where all illusions burn away and only truth remains. The flames still flicker, the smoke still rises, and there, at the center of it all, stands Bhairava, terrifying and beautiful, destroyer and protector, death and liberation in one fierce form. He is waiting. He has always been waiting, not somewhere far away, in ancient India or mystical realms, but right here, at the edge of your consciousness, at the boundary of your courage, at the threshold you must cross to become fully yourself. Will you meet him there? Will you face the fierce grace? Will you walk the path of transformation that requires everything and offers everything in return? The choice, as it always has been, is yours. If you found this exploration valuable, if something here resonated with you or challenged you or opened new understanding, consider supporting this channel. Like this video, subscribe for more deep dives into mythology, folklore, and the wisdom traditions of humanity. Share this with someone who might benefit from encountering Bhairava. Comment below with your thoughts, questions, or experiences. And most importantly, take what you've learned here and make it alive in your own life. Don't let it remain merely information. Let it become a transformation. Let the fierce grace of Bhairava work its changes in you, burning away what is false so that what is true can finally be revealed. Om Kalabhairavaya Nama. Salutations to the Lord of Time, the Fierce One, the Protector, the Liberator, the consciousness that destroys all illusion and reveals all truth. Thank you for walking this path with me. Until next time, may you have the courage to face what must be faced, the strength to let go of what must be released, and the wisdom to recognize your own deepest nature shining in the heart of the fierce deity himself.